Good afternoon, everybody. I am, of course, the script doctor. Thank you for being here. I have a very special guest today. That is the Prince of Positivity, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett. Thank you for joining me this afternoon to talk about a very fascinating subject that is pretty much around 10 hours away from being confirmed or not.
Once again, it's funny. The first time I moved to LA in 1988 for the second season of Star Trek: The Next Generation, there was a writer's strike. So it's been something that I've been it has been a part of my LA experience for the last 34 years.
You know, it's funny you say that because I went to LA first time in 2006, and on my second arrival in the summer of 2007 was the 2007 writer's strike, where I was prohibited from pitching or shopping around, so I ended up working as a PA, an assistant in things that are not writing related for that summer. And it was fun and inventive and educational, but a little bittersweet because for what was it? 10, it was several weeks. It was several months, actually. 11 weeks or more than that. I can't remember. It was a long time because I ended up going back home to Canada while it's still going on.
So yeah, and that writer's strike was how we got the final episode of the second season of TNG, Shades of Grey, which was a clip show.
Yep, right there on the medical bed.
The only clip show in Star Trek history.
Yes. Oh boys, but yes, we're 10 hours away from the WGA East and West. They're in negotiations right now with the Alliance of Motion Pictures and Television Producers to address some issues with regards to like the previous two writers' strikes, streaming. And for those that are unaware, back in 2007 there was a writer's strike because networks and studios were adding to their websites the ability to watch their broadcast content online with ads. And if it was like a feature film, you could rent it like video on demand at the time. And because of this new media technology, it wasn't stipulated in the existing WGA contracts for residual payments. And that caused a big issue, which resulted in the 2007 strike. And nobody, even though they did reconcile that after many, many weeks negotiating and picketing, and a lot of television shows and talk shows and whatnot lost their writing staff, and everybody was shuffled around. And the dawn of the golden age of television had a big pause, so to speak. And I don't even think it really recovered, because even after that, since the following years, you had fewer great shows in comparison to prior to that writer's strike, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about TV is it fundamentally changed. I mean, Star Trek is a great example. You went from having 26 episodes a season, like with Picard season 3, you have 10.
Mm-hmm.
And those episodes, they were in syndication. Star Trek TNG was one of the first hour-long syndicated dramas that was on TV, but you still got paid. There was advertising revenue, and every time a show aired or a network show aired, you had sponsors buying ads, and that had been true since the beginning of television. So when you got residual payments, if repeats happened and things, you would have a revenue stream that could be accounted for. And that's where residuals came from.
Yep.
And then the industry has seen for the last 40 years, I remember in the DVD world, when DVDs became as popular as they did, it was really the first time that you saw major television shows released in box sets. You could buy a whole TV series. And that was an additional revenue stream that existed. That really was, I mean, you could buy Twilight Zone or you could buy Star Trek, but, it was hard to buy I Love Lucy, or it was hard to buy Friday Night Lights, whatever your favorite TV show was. You could then buy it. And that was a huge additional revenue stream that didn't exist before.
Oh, exactly. I remember the boom happened because not only was an additional revenue stream on just putting them out there, but they found new markets to dig up old cutscenes, behind the scene footage stuff to really give it a full package of the show. I mean, you yourself did fantastic work on the Next Generation DVDs, Blu-rays, and all that stuff. And I think you mentioned before that Paramount was releasing them season by season instead of the initial box set, which probably would have been a better strategy for them in the first place. But they did do that, and it was a really strong revenue stream because all of a sudden, and I remember this hearing it from the experienced writers that I got to interview and work with and be assistants for, which is that shows that they worked on in the 80s and 90s, like Cheers. A couple of writers I knew that worked on Cheers, they were getting additional checks on
Yep.
top of their normal syndication residuals because they were being sold on DVD, and they were really happy about this. They thought this was fantastic because luckily, like in the 80s, there were changes to the Writers Guild contracts where they would get residuals on at-home distribution media. So they did normal television syndications and rebroadcasts for international markets, and then they would have specials because they were doing VHS collection episodes. They could buy on VHS at the time, and that opened the doorway to basically saying, well, yeah, all these writers who worked on these episodes, if they're all collected into one package and sold to a direct market, they would still get stuff in their contracts for that. And it was great. And unfortunately, the union members assumed that was the case when it went to online as well. But for some reason, the powers that be said, no, it's still part of the original broadcast. So we already paid you for that commercial. Just because it's on demand on a website doesn't mean you get more, even though there are different commercial ads being played in between, or there's pop-up or rollout ads that are being played below the image. The writers didn't get that, and that sparked that debate. And it continues again right now, because what I'll do for the audience listening, and so happy that you're all here to go over this with us, is I'll show you the pattern of demands that the WGA is requesting from the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. So here is the pattern of demands. So the pattern of demands is a constitutionally required statement of general objectives for the MBA negotiations. On March 7th, 2023, the 2023 pattern of demands was approved by the WGA members 98.4%, that's 5,553 voting yes, and 1.6%, 90 voting no. And I'm going to pause here because this is a very interesting number, because technically speaking, given how much content there actually is and how many things there are in production, 90 writers is the majority of the working writers in Hollywood, kind of. Everybody else is essentially just fighting for a job, trying to get a staffing job or selling a script or something of that nature. And I completely understand why those 90 voted no when we go through some of these pattern of demands. And I'd love to get your take on that as well, Robert. So the first one is compensation and residuals, which is an increased minimum on compensation significantly to address the devaluation of writing in all areas of television, new media, and features.
I think it's important to mention that you used to be able to make a great living as a TV writer.
Yeah.
And if you were on a hit show, like we were just talking about, they might have a sitcom might have 30 episodes a season. And you'd work in a writer's room and you'd get residuals because you would have repeats on a hit show. And there was a lot of money to be made. And that was 40 years ago. In the last 40 years, all of those instances of what made you money as a writer have been diminished in every area. So it's important to know that that's where we're at now. So writers have a very hard time, even working writers on a great show, making the kind of living they used to be able to make.
In addition to the fact that a lot of them live in California, and the costs in California have gone up higher than the wage rate has, especially for the middle class, which is obscene, and it shouldn't be doing that, in my opinion, but it is what it is. Then you also have the fact that some studios want to do shorter seasons. So now instead of working 26 weeks out of the year for a 30 episode, either sitcom or hour-long drama, you're now working 12 weeks. And then you've got to find a work for the rest of that time. And you also have to work around the schedule, because a lot of people don't know this, but staff writers, if you've got the credit on that episode, you've got to fly to location and oversee the production of your script. And if there's problems, you got to solve them. And if you can't solve them, the showrunner comes in. And if you're in a real tight bind, sometimes they call someone like me, and I would end up making according to the latest WGA schedule rates, I would clear about $2,500 just for working on maybe a half page. And
Right.
that's a lot of money to a normal person, and I actually can still consider it a lot of money even to myself. But those jobs are few and far between, and on top of that, that's not enough to make a living as a result. Even though it's quote unquote a short period of time to actually do the work.
Yeah.
It's just not there. And for the staff writers themselves, if you're on staff, you still make some really decent money. But again, because the expenses are so high in California, unless you're renting a place out there and living in another state, you are going to be struggling a little bit financially. Um, and then it's terrible in the fact that the industry itself isn't trying to lobby for more affordable prices in California when they should be up by all measures and bounds as affordable in other states. It's kind of nuts, but that's what they want to do is they want to increase minimum compensation in all areas of new television media. So that means basically higher wage rates for staffed rooms, and the next one is standardized compensation and residual terms for features, whether they're released theatrically or on streaming. Now, this I think is probably the first fair point. That's indisputable because you have to distinguish or at least find a base rate to stem from if your feature film that you've sold the script to and you're getting back end points is going to go theatrical or streaming, because those are two different models that have two different revenues.
And I can speak to this too. So back in 2008, I produced a horror film for Warner Brothers Warner Premiere, which was their direct to video division, called The Hills Run Red. We had, when we were making it as a non-union low budget movie, we were paying a writer, Dave Scow, who was a WGA writer, what he would get for that. And when it became a studio movie, since studios are signatories to the guild, they have to pay guild rates. He made a substantially more money when it became a WGA project. But what was interesting about it was because it was made by the direct to video division of the studio, it was not considered a screenplay. It was considered a teleplay. And so obviously you didn't get as much money as you did. And I went to bat and I said, a teleplay, it's not, I mean, we're taking this to film festivals. Just because it's being released direct to video doesn't mean it's not a feature. But they hadn't changed the rules yet. It was still considered a TV movie. And
Yep.
I'm like, but it's not going to be necessarily a TV movie. And if it is, it's going to go to cable, just like any other feature film would. And it was really strange and how that worked. And I didn't understand that. I mean, for all of us, we're making a feature film. What difference does it make what venue you watch it on? But teleplays, they were made for TV movies, but this wasn't made for TV.
Yep.
It wasn't made for broadcast. So it was a very weird situation.
You have, if you want to put that movie on broadcast, there's a lot you'd have to cut around or blur out or censor because
Exactly. And what's really interesting now is that, so if a movie, and this is, I think, at the core of the problem, there are different revenue streams for, like, a feature film had a theatrical release. Then they added a video on demand, or now we've got video on demand. Then you have the home video release and then the streaming release. So there's all these different revenue streams that used to be coming in. Well, if you're making a movie now direct to streaming, there is no other revenue stream for it. They're not making home video releases. They're not making video on demand releases. They're just releasing it. If you've made a Netflix movie, you get paid to write it, but there's no additional revenue stream. You don't get paid for how many views it gets. If you write the most popular movie on Netflix for 4 months, you don't get any extra money than if it wasn't the most popular movie. And yet your movie might be driving 10 million subscriptions to the service. So there's a demonstrable revenue stream. But of course, every subscription does not go to one movie. It's amortized over all the movies that have been made by the streamers.
Yes,
So,
and because the subscription is as affordable as it can be to the market, you end up getting fractions upon fractions of a cent if they were to try to calculate it out.
Yes.
And what you're basically describing here, because when I was starting out, and you'll know this very well because you have worked on a number of projects that had what was called multiple windows of distribution. So you had your theatrical window, that's your first window. Then your second window would be your televised network in conjunction with a VHS or home video release, or pay-per-view would be another window. And then you have your international sales. And those were your main windows where you could constantly be generating revenue from one piece of work. And with the streaming and the direction and the misguided direction of the studios leaning heavily into streaming, just because they were looking more at the overall gross numbers of Netflix as opposed to the real bottom line, they have now effectively killed, or at least very well mitigated, the effectiveness of those secondary windows in favor of essentially what I like to call the MMORPG subscription model of media, which is you pay monthly to play online in the game with various updates from time to time, but you're still paying monthly for something, and that the people that are producing it aren't able to generate any more revenue. So then they have those you buy into to get more cool tricks and tips and skins and things of that nature. And I'm worried that streaming would go that way when during the 2000 writers strike, after seeing the grievances and what they wanted, I thought, well, if you wanted to do to make sure that this is clean and people still make their money, the most profitable aspect, not just for the writers, but for the studios themselves, would be for these streaming platforms to function on a network model that has the one advantage being it's on demand, which means it's at the customer's own schedule, as opposed to you having to book, that you have to compete for the 9 p.m. slot on Thursday.
Well, and now there's, I mean, again, this just struck me now as you were just talking. We're now seeing movies, Evil Dead Rise, which is in theaters right now. Evil Dead Rise and the Predator movie Prey, and the current Alien movie that's being made by Fede Alvarez, who made the remake of Evil Dead in 2013. So Evil Dead Rise was made direct to streaming. However, after test screenings, they decided that the movie worked so well, they were going to put it in theaters. Now, I haven't seen this addressed at all, but were the writers who were paid to write a streaming feature, when it went theatrically, did they get compensated for that? The movie's now made over $80 million at the theater.
Mm-hmm.
$80 million. That is found money. That is money that they just decided, they conjured out of thin air. That was also true of Paramount's Smile, $17 million spend, direct to streaming, went theatrical, made over $200 million theatrically. I would think, throw your writers a couple of $1 million. I mean,
give them some gross points. It doesn't have to be huge. Maybe 1 point on the gross.
Do you think if you wrote a movie that you thought was direct to streaming, like Evil Dead Rise, and it goes out, they put it out theatrically, and after 2 weekends, it's already made $88 million. Do you think the writers don't deserve each getting, I don't know how many writers were on that film, let's call it 2. If they each got a $1.5 million check, don't you think they'd be happy?
Yeah. Don't you think that they'd be willing to work with that studio again and have maybe better negotiations for future installments or other properties?
and wouldn't they be deserving?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anybody, but you know what? You know who doesn't want to pay that? The studios.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they want to do the studios. I mean, and again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the studio said, yes, here's a check. We're going to cut you a check. And maybe they did get. But the thing is, according to WGA rules, they made a movie under streaming. They were paid what they were supposed to be paid, whatever schedules they were working under. And then is there even anything that is, I would be willing to bet that there isn't anything in contracts that say if we decide to go theatrical. Maybe there is. I don't know. I haven't seen it. I'm not up on that, but
I hope there would be. I mean, I would definitely fight for that.
It just hasn't happened very much.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, this is the thing. If when it comes right down to it, is if you wrote a movie that's a big hit, a WGA writer, you would get compensated well, maybe not. No one's gonna ever say fairly. They always want more money, but you would get compensated based on the success of what you've written. That's the idea behind it.
Yes.
And
you know what? That's the same thing's going to happen at Warner Brothers with Blue Beetle. That was meant for a direct-to-be streaming film, and now they're recently releasing it theatrically. I am hoping that the writers had in their contract some sort of theatrical option, because, I started thinking about this during the lockdowns when they started saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to do Dune day and date, Tenet day and date, Wonder Woman 84 day and date." And I was thinking, you know what? If that's going to be the case, if I ever struck a deal with the studio for a script, I would have to put in the contract for a theatrical option. Because if you're going to do a day and date something, or streaming only or theatrical only, I need to have one of those two options as a points of additional revenue for residuals. That has to be the negotiating perspective, because it's like what you said, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And I learned that lesson the hard way for many years in my career.
The reason that people were so upset by that is by releasing something day and date, you are diminishing what a movie would make theatrically. And if you're making a theatrical motion picture, your biggest revenue stream, as far as writers go, is the residuals you get based on box office performance. You've probably got that built into your contract, that if it makes $50 million or $100 million or $200 million, you get a certain monetary number that's you've pre-negotiated it. And if you release it on two platforms at once, you've immediately cut into the theatrical revenue of that movie, because people can stay home and watch it. What's the incentive to go to the theater and pay your whatever $15 to go see the film? So, and Warner Brothers did that without, and not only that, as we were talking about before we went on, the studios don't have a money vault that they go into and take the money out to make these projects. They borrow all this money from banks. And so there's interest payments that they have to pay back. And when you have financing partners like Warner Brothers did with Legendary, and Warner Brothers just makes a decision, we're going to release this day and date. Legendary is like, we helped you get the money to make this movie, and we owe it back to the bank. And you're now you've unilaterally decided to cut into the theatrical revenue stream of this film. Well, you're now costing us money, because it's going to take us more time to pay our obligations back, and we're going to incur more interest payments. And Warner Brothers just did this to an entire slate of movies for a year.
Yep.
Without even talking to their partners. I mean, I'd never heard of anything like that before.
It was a very bad move, and they tried to justify it through the desperate situations occurring. And the other part too is that I don't think there was any insurance with the studios that would cover such an event. I don't think they had that in any of their options, and they still don't, as far as I know, to this day. I don't think there's any insurance company that's saying, yes, in the events of another pandemic that could shut down the world, we will compensate you for the expenses you have. It's like, no, those insurance companies would go out of business instantly. It's too high of a risk for them to even take at that point. And you're absolutely right. It was a terrible decision on studios, especially Warner Brothers, at that point to do that, because now they have really damaged a lot of working relationships with those studios, those production entities that do a lot of work for them, that help make the Warner Brothers brand, the one that's one of the few that's lasted 100 years in town.
Well, I mean, and the same thing is true of, like, you think about what happened to Scarlett Johansson on her Black Widow movie. That was one of the first movies at Disney. I think it was the first Marvel movie released during the pandemic or coming out of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And, those movies, based on what previous Marvel movies had been earning for a decade, her deal probably, she expected a certain return. And based on, she was paid compensation to be Black Widow again. And by not releasing it or putting it out day and date on Disney Plus, immediately her ability to get a box office bump based on what she'd negotiated was diminished. So right there, what Disney had entered into negotiations with Scarlett Johansson and promised her, then they turned around and undercut her ability to achieve the box office bumps that she was due, that she had negotiated, because now it's going day and date. Yep. And that wasn't part of the negotiating tactic. So they basically undercut her ability to get the amount of money that she had previously negotiated for. And that's why she sued Disney.
Exactly. And the other part too that a lot of people don't know is that actors in Scarlett Johansson's popularity spectrum have their own kind of mini production houses. That's where they hire staff and people to help find them screenplays or develop projects that they're going to do on themselves. So when they get a check for, say, 20 to 50 million, it's not necessarily going directly to them. It's going to that company, and it's going to be paying salaries and that staff for however many months or years to help them find more work. So it's not like they're just rolling in cash, on a bed somewhere, even though there are some actors that I've heard do that. it is really going back into their small business so that they can keep working, because that's one of the things a lot of people don't realize is actors don't get as much work as you expect, the same way as writers. It's really like maybe 2 or 3% of the actors that are working are as the actors as a whole in the industry. It's a very small percentage overall. There's oversaturation of the market, but we need that variety to, bring in new life. The problem is that there's only so much money, only so much time to make things, and everybody wants to mitigate the potential losses, so they go with the stuff that's tried and true that works, and that's why we see the same set of faces, the same set of writers, the same set of directors over and over again. It's very hard enough just to break into the industry, but then break beyond your threshold to become a recognized name.
And how many movies can you make a year?
Yeah.
And how many times are you going to get paid? And like you pointed out, actors who have their own production companies, they also have their own staff. I
Mhm.
mean, an actor, especially a successful actor, is themselves their own business, and they employ people. And the only way they can employ people is out of the money that they're making. So, and whatever other ancillary ways that they've decided or businesses they've started. So, if you think of every actor as their own business that have people that are in their employ to make sure they can be the actors they are, you realize how it all there's a trickle down uh, response throughout the industry. And so it's not just people aren't just getting paid and pocketing all that cash. They have their team of people, they have lawyers, they have agents, they have managers, then they have all the people that work for them that all get part of the money they make.
Yeah, and considering the fact that teams is a big essential aspect of the industry, the next part of the compensation and residuals for the demands for the writers' room is to address the abuses of mini rooms, which I find is kind of weird. Um,
Now, explain this isn't you could explain this better than I can.
sure.
Explain what a mini room is to the audience.
So a mini room is really just a smaller writer staff. It's usually 6 writers or less, and they're working on a smaller show between 13 episodes or less, typically. And personally, I have no problem with mini rooms in that regard, because for any of you that are fans of the TV series Sliders, Mark Zickery came into that show late, and he started a mini room to fix the show so it'd be back in good comfort with the fans and with the ratings. And I think it was him and 3 other writers, if I'm not mistaken. Memory is a little spotchy there, but I do remember when he came in, it was a tight knit group. And I'm fine with a relatively small writers' room. I think 3 to 6 to 9 at the most is pretty good for an hour long drama of a 22 episode series, because everybody gets work, and you don't have too many cooks in the kitchen that can screw up the narrative of what's going on with the show. The problem that other writers have with mini rooms is that it's more competitive for them to work, and I completely understand where they're coming from there. Uh, there are other sitcoms where a writer's room has anywhere from 12 to 24 people, or even for like soap operas and other shows, it's quite long, quite a large room. And they usually do that so they can divide up the work, make it less stressful for all the teams. They can break down episodes together. Then they do the assignments to either writing pair or writing triple or single, what have you. They get the credit on that script, and then it goes into production. And it's really just get through the content a lot faster and keep everything on schedule, which I totally am in support of. The problem is that I don't think that there are, with some of the shows that are being greenlit and being pitched, I don't think that there is enough room for you to have a staff in the double digits and justify its expense, especially considering the fact that you're not really going to get the quality, because when you have that many people in one room having to fight over the direction of a limited number of episodes, you're not going to get as much work done as you expect. And that's the harsh reality of it. So I think what they should be doing is basically trying to encourage more traditional format seasons of the 22 to 24 episodes productions, because that way you can kind of get away with up to 12 people or maybe even 18 in a room, and not lose sight of what you're trying to do as a television show. But right now, the way mini rooms are, I think they're okay. Just on the paper side of things, it all comes down to, again, another aspect people don't realize is that the showrunner, the person that is put in charge of the production of the show, aside from the producers and the studios, they get to pick the staff in the writers' room. So sometimes they're told, yes, you only have these many spots to fill, or sometimes they say hire as many writers as you think you need to get the show done in the way you need it done, in which case you get a slightly larger room. But it's in their hands. So it's kind of weird for me, as a screenwriter, as someone who has fought very hard to work on staff and be assistants and whatnot on television shows, to be looking at mini rooms and seeing them as a bad thing, unless it's in the context of, oh, it's a mini room for 12 episodes and it's only 12 weeks, and then that's the end of the contract and we're not going any further. That's a whole different thing. That's not addressed here, unfortunately, in this request for demands. But that's the basic details of what a mini room is and what the situations are in writers' rooms.
They're also using mini rooms now to workshop potential shows that they don't necessarily commit to. They'll put together a mini room to come up with 3 or 4 scripts for a potential series, and and decide whether they're going to move forward or not. And so the people that have worked in the mini room don't get compensated as if the show was a greenlit TV show.
Yes.
I was listening to that on one of our national public radio stations here, and I was like, well, that's a great way to get around not paying people.
Yeah,
you're making people work on something that might not get made.
That's the other thing that I always found kind of weird, especially in the last couple of years, where people will they'd be signing a contract that is essentially them working on a pitch on behalf of someone else, but there's no money for it up front, which is weird, because it's like, well, if you're working on a pitch, which means it's not going to go anywhere unless someone else buys it. And if you have any experience in this industry, the odds of something being purchased is very, very high. Like, it's astronomical almost at points. And it takes me back to that issue with the executive producer who is currently suing Lucasfilm, who worked on The Acolyte. I mean, she's an experienced producer. Why would she sign or take anything that didn't offer money up front or a dollar value up front to start the work? It just boggles my mind.
That is a very weird. I have no idea what happened there. I'm like, how does that even happen?
And the $5,000 that Disney paid, well, guess what? That's kind of a WGA standard for, like, say, doing 1 day's work on 1 page or a couple pages of something. I mean, it's the minimum, and I mean, I don't think it's great. It's fair for the experience and the position that this particular producer had, but it just threw me away, and I was like, I don't understand how you get to the situation, because I've been propositioned like, hey, do you want to work on? We have this television show idea. Do you want to work on it? It's like, great. What are you offering? And they're like, oh, well, if we sell it, we'll pay you this. Like, no, what are you offering before you sell it? Like, I'm still working. Like, I don't work for free. And they're trying to convince me, well, that's not how it works anymore. And I refuse to believe that. I know it's not how it works. I know exactly how it works. It's the Harlan Ellison rule. If you're going to hire me to write something, you pay me.
Right.
And I don't care if you're upset about that. That's how it works. And if you try to hire someone and not pay them, you're going to get what you paid for, which is a whole lot of nothing, or at least nothing that you can probably use to further benefit you. So that is there are other contentions addressing the abuse of mini rooms. Next, they want to ensure appropriate television series writing compensation throughout entire process of pre-production, production, and post-production. So this is actually pretty fair. It means that you're essentially, the writing staff is getting paid from beginning to end.
Yeah, and for the time they're doing the work.
Yes, and I think that's absolutely fair. I again, a lot of these things are just negotiating the current rates to be a little bit higher to essentially adjusted for and to compensate for inflation. That's one of the main reasons for it. This one I'll probably need your help with, because I haven't heard this word used in a while for it, but it's expand span protections to cover all television writers. Do you remember what the span protections were? Because I can't for the life of me. I even tried looking it up again, and it's like,
yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that has to do with how long something airs for, or that I don't know. I don't know the answer to this.
Yeah, because I was wondering, like, is that for, say, um, your affiliates, your network, like syndication affiliate span, or is it production for VOD or home video? Like, I was kind of lost because I was like, the wording on that is a little vague for me, because if they wanted to expand the overall like time frame of distribution and whatnot, that would, I would figure the word distribution would be in there, or something of that nature. So
Yeah.
that kind of, that threw me off for a little bit. This one, the apply MBA minimums to comedy variety programs made for new media. That's very limited to just the late night talk shows.
Right. I mean, and I think that I have no problem with that either. I
Neither do
mean,
I. The only
the problem
problem.
I think that they have with that is that that could get very expensive
Hmm.
because those late night talk shows are on every night, 5 nights a week.
Yep.
So, but I don't, I mean, I would imagine the pressure that those writers are under to come up with material on a daily basis has to be extraordinary.
They are 16-hour days, my understanding. So you're up very early in the morning. You're covering as much news as you can, writing as many jokes or bits that you can on the news as it is coming. Up until I think around 5 p.m. is when they usually do the recordings, the tapings before the actual broadcast, unless it's one of the rare live night shows. Um,
By the
and
way, just to go back to span protection,
sure.
um, span the span provision has protected overscale pay
Oh,
for many writer producers working on short order episodic series. The provision defends against the erosion of overscale pay that can occur as writing and production schedules extend over long periods of time by limiting the period of time covered by a writer producer's episodic fee to 2.4 weeks of work. If a writer producer works longer than 2.4 weeks multiplied by the number of episodes, additional compensation is due.
hmm.
So that's because the provision has an earnings cap and is limited to work on short order dramatic series. The provision specifically excludes work on multi-part closed-end series. It is important to consider whether your employment qualifies for span protection. And so that's interesting.
That is, because that changes, that gives us new insight with regards to some of the streaming shows.
Yeah, because that's interesting. You only get
You get less than 3 weeks.
your episodic fee is 2.4 weeks, and if the show goes longer, you don't get compensated for that.
Oh, that's very similar to the original actors deal for Star Trek back in the 60s.
Yeah. So there you go.
So, okay, well, thank you very much for clarifying that. So, yes, expand span protections to cover all television writers. So, ideally, it would be to expand that time to beyond a 2.4 week, revenue window. Um,
And
I
again, that just goes to show you that imagine you're a TV writer and you're getting paid for, you're working on an episodic show, limited series, and instead of, the limited series ends up doing reshoots or shooting for another week or two, you'd have to work on that show and not get paid because it's beyond 2.4 weeks.
Yep.
So you get nothing.
Yeah,
And if you
that's
look at it,
BS.
yeah, if you look at a show like Citadel that had to basically be reshot all the way through, did the writers get any compensation for that at all?
That's a very good question. And it also goes kind of the same with the Rings of Power, because they had to do some extensive reshoots there. Did
Yeah.
they get
And see, I
compensation?
think one of the things that is also happening that people aren't really talking about is there are, and if you read the article about the production Amazon Studios was doing on some of their streaming shows, look, TV shows have been made the same way for 50 years. The fact that there's all these runaway productions, there's people that are used to feature film budgets and then they come and try and make TV and then they go wildly over budget. You have an industry and with all the now the diversity and equity hires, which are getting people into positions that might not be as experienced as other people, rightly or wrongly, you are dealing with an industry that is going wildly over budget more and more and more and more and more when that shouldn't happen. And so if you're going to go wildly over budget because production doesn't know what they're doing, the writers need a taste because it's not the writer's fault.
That's right. And the writers have to be, and again, as I mentioned earlier, the writers, if you're the credited writer on that episode, you've got to be on set to address those problems. So you're still supposed to be getting paid during that production.
Yeah.
And that has to be in there. And it kind of reminds me, like what you tweeted the other day with regards to how like Star Trek would be an expensive show, even today by today's standards, because it's always been an expensive show relatively.
Always. I
And
mean, people think that there's such a weird, people think that the original Star Trek was cheap because they're planet sets. People make fun of the way they look because they're stage bound sets. But, you know, they went out on location a lot. They had at the time incredibly sophisticated visual effects work. The music that they made for that show, they had, you know, it was a very expensive show.
yes,
And it was never made. And Brian Fuller, the original producer of Star Trek Discovery and of course Hannibal, he told me that Les Moonves was under the wrong impression that you could make Star Trek for $1 million an episode, not understanding that a science fiction show, any science fiction show, has large upfront costs because you have to build the sets, you have to build or make the costumes, and if you have props that don't exist that you can't get off the shelf, these are expenses that cost all up front. So a science fiction show like Star Trek has an exorbitantly high upfront cost. But what you do is you spread out because you don't have to build anything if you're going to do if you're going to make a shipbound show like Star Trek Picard season 3. The reason they could build the Enterprise D bridge is because most of the rest of the show took place in sets that you had built. So there was nothing new there. So your set costs get amortized across all scripts of all the episodes.
yes.
So that you have upfront fees, but they get spread out of the cost of the show. So what you think looks really expensive is on budget, hopefully, as you make your 10 episodes or whatever.
And I think part of that misnomer for the cheap 60s show came by accident from DeForest Kelley, because he did this beautiful documentary touring the Next Generation set. And he talked about how it would have been so great if we had the budget of this show for 66, but he's not taking account the fact that they just had to spend more money in the 80s compared to the 60s. And because the technology and the craftsmanship had increased in those 20 years, as what happens with set design, everything looks a lot more expensive when it really isn't as much as you would think overall. Like the
Right.
cost would probably be almost on par with, given that 20-year difference. And the same thing could be said 20 years later when they're working on Enterprise, because that was a big budget show as well. And even now, when I'm thinking of like, oh, if you were to do another Star Trek show, I would say you're looking between a minimum of 30 to 50 million up front on your first season, and then subsequent seasons you could probably do a reasonable budget for between 8 and 12 so far per episode, depending on how much you want to really invest into it. But it is still going to be very, very expensive. I would say when Discovery started, having been able to see some of the sets they built over at Pinewood, Toronto, and the effort put in, I was like, oh, this does look a little pricey. But when I saw the actual balance sheet of like, $12 million just for the per episode, it's like, that seems a little high compared to the fact that you have the Expanse that is doing something almost on par with special effects and sets, elaborate sets, for a fraction of that. And
Oh
it's like,
yeah, I
where's
mean,
that money going? And it's in the same city.
Star Trek Picard seasons 1 and 2 were not wildly, but they were over budget.
Yeah.
And the thing is, because the people that are running a lot of these shows have a lot less experience, and they are, the way the business is running, let's just say that the people that really the Rick Berman era Star Trek at the end of every season was never over budget.
Yep.
And that's one of the reasons that they left Rick Berman alone. It wasn't until Enterprise, where he had to deal with the fledgling network, that he had any problems, because Paramount was very happy with the work that they were doing on Star Trek, because it was a finely oiled machine. And if they wanted to do a larger episode, they'd do enough bottle episodes to cover the additional expense that they had for visual effects or whatever on a Best of Both Worlds or something. And that's how TV should be done. But you need very experienced, very qualified people who know what they're doing.
And I think because we've had that abuse in spending and reshoots in television, which, I mean, those are usually few and rare because they have insurance days. So usually around 2 per episode is what they can afford. And you're finding out that they're reshooting whole episodes or re-editing everything to try and meet a release date or a new release date. So it gives the wrong impression, especially to the other writers that aren't working, that they want more money because they're saying, oh, well, there is money to be had. So why don't we get a piece? And I think that's fair, but it's coming as a result of essentially either a lack of experience or incompetence or a little bit of both. And so it goes into this next point, which is that they want to increase residuals for undercompensated reuse markets, which I think is fair. That's network television, broadcast, video on demand, direct to customer markets.
I mean,
think,
now
yeah.
you've also got all these places like there's things popping up like Tubi TV. There's movies airing for free on IMDb as long as they have ads. I mean, somebody's making money off this stuff. Movies are everywhere now.
And I think this is also the first real negotiation where studios like Amazon, Apple, and Netflix actually have a seat at this table.
Yes.
And that's a big change as well, because they have alternative sources of revenue that allow them to be able to produce a lot of the content that they're putting on there. And I understand it's fair for them to be involved because, again, they're paying for some of these shows or films that they're releasing, but they also don't have as much at stake when it comes to a strike because Apple has the iPhone and all their Apple products. Amazon has their books, their amenities, everything that you would need at home. Where's the threat that a WGA union could provide to them? It's like, oh, well, we can't produce any shows for a while. Well, that's okay. That's less money that we're spending, but we're still generating a whole bunch of other income on these other avenues. So we can kind of technically wait a little bit if we have to. I mean, it's not ideal for them, but it's not going to hurt them the same way that a studio would, which is like their whole bread and butter is getting stuff out so that they can recoup those expenses and make a profit.
Well, and also there's things that I've always wondered about, like my phone service is T-Mobile. And I like T-Mobile, but like you get T-Mobile and they'll give you 6 months of Netflix for free. Well, okay, if Netflix's only business is the only money they're taking in is subscriptions, and I'm getting 6 months of Netflix for free, then I become a subscription that isn't paying anything. And so how does that work? I mean, I don't know I have no idea if this is a big thing or a small thing, but if a bunch of people are getting free subscriptions to a streaming service and I'm gobbling up Netflix shows because I get free subscriptions, then I'm watching and enjoying the fruits of these writers' labors, and there's no money coming in from me as a viewer. And yet they count me as a viewer.
Yep.
You know, I'm on their analytics sheet. And, you know, as we know, if a show, if I'm one of those people that only starts and finishes shows, like then I become a viewer that they're taking note of and going, see, this person is not only starting our shows, but finishing them as well. Unlike, and that for Netflix, it's a completion rate. So Netflix will cancel if you start watching a Netflix show and you don't finish. Well, if a show has 50%, this is only on Netflix, 50% of a non-completion rate. So that 50% of the people that start watching a show don't finish it. If it's 50% or less, Netflix cancels that show.
Yep.
So all of these analytics, that's why it's so crazy that Rings of Power, the most expensive TV show ever made, has a completion rate in the United States of 37%, and they keep it on the air. I mean, and in Europe, it's 45%. So that show, by Netflix's metric, Amazon doesn't care because they have all the money in the world. So they're going to double down for a second season, hire more people, try and make it better. But if it were a Netflix show to get canceled, this isn't really on point here, but I'm just, again, how does that work if a streaming service is giving away memberships? Theoretically, that's kind of taking money out of the pockets of the writers if they're going to get compensated based on views or subscriptions.
Exactly. And the other part too is that even though from the customer side of things, if it's a free subscription for you, I'm pretty sure that those service providers have actually paid for that
That's
promotion,
exactly right.
which
Yeah.
means that Netflix is still making money. So what percentage of that can the writers be justifiably compensated with, because their content is essentially helping two additional businesses, Netflix and a service provider that is using Netflix and their show to give people a access to it
And
in addition to
Netflix
like a
can turn
phone.
around and say, well, no, that money is coming into us. It has nothing to do with viewers. This is a promotion we're doing from service provider to service provider. And you're like, yeah, but your only service is providing shows for people to watch. So
Yeah.
you're getting money to come into your coffers based on the shows that you have. And yet you've figured out a clever way to cut out anybody that's actually making the content that you're giving away a service for. I mean,
And
and it's, I mean, I understand that's good business, but at the end of the day, you're cutting out the people that made the very shows that you want to have people want to get a subscription in the first place.
well, that goes right into their next demand, a fair one too, which is restrict uncompensated use of excerpts. And what is a free subscription to Netflix if not an uncompensated use of an excerpt of the content?
100%. 100%. And so people can see why. I mean, look, a lot of people can look at this and there is, like I've seen in my own career, such as it is, I've worked basically in the indie world. It is incredibly difficult to get any compensation based other than what you're getting paid every week to work on independent films.
Mhm.
And yet, an independent movie can live in an ecosystem and generate money for people for years. Like my film now, Tango Shalom, it came out in the United States in September of 2021. It just dropped in the UK on their Sky Store 2 weeks ago. So, and it's playing in Thailand, it's open in Israel, and it's an ongoing business concern. Well, is it going to make any money? That remains to be seen. But still, a TV show and a movie is an ongoing business proposition that it's not just its theatrical run. It continues to generate some kind of income somewhere for years.
Yep.
And that's where the idea of residuals come from. And if you're a writer, the movie or the TV show or the variety show, whatever, would not exist without the initial foundation of having that script.
Exactly. I have friends that have made movies with Trauma. And one of the things they learned the hard way, because I mean, Kaufman is a really great guy, but he's basically said, listen, we do what we can to get your movie out there. The rest is up to you. And you got to
Right.
push it. And if you want to elevate outside of, Trauma and do other things, you got to push hard. And I know people who have made movies like a decade ago. They're still pushing it to this day, getting it sold in international markets for, limited release windows and things on streaming and whatnot. And they're making some decent residuals back, but it's a very hard job. And it's one thing that they were like, I can't believe, I've made 3 movies in my career and I spent most of my time pushing and promoting these films as opposed to actually making them or making other films. It's like, that's the nature of the game that you risk, especially in the independent circuit.
Yeah. And because everyone thinks people who work in Hollywood just get rich.
I
I
know.
mean, on a
I mean, it's
sliding
fair, but
scale,
I know. Yeah.
there's a very large percentage of wealth out there, but the thing is, it's a very small percentage of people that are getting really wealthy off everything that's made.
Yeah. I just grew up to the top and I was like, this is actually a very accurate representation of working in Hollywood to not
Yeah.
working to a degree with
Yeah.
a couple of variants, I would say. But yeah, there's a lot of people that, they hustle every day to get jobs and they work. And then there's the ones that are, again, Hollywood has a short list that, as you've mentioned to me before, they have a group of people that they want to work with. That list does change from time to time, but it does mostly stay the same for a few years at least. And that's when you have to strike while the iron's hot and get as much work as you can, because once it's gone, it's who knows how long it's going to be to get it again.
No, I mean, it's, you think about people like studio movies are all over $100 million now. And there's maybe 10, maybe 20 people on the outside that those are the only people on planet Earth that studios want to direct their movies.
Yep.
20 people. Now, that seems silly, but when you think about it, you have to have who are you going to entrust $200 million to? And you can only trust $200 million to people that have a track record of making $200 million movies. And there aren't that many. And
Yep.
so that's why it's very interesting. Like, we also are dealing with allowing, like the MPAA or the MPA, if you want your film to be, uh, you now have to, as of this year, or I guess next year, there's very strict rules about equity, equality, and inclusion, where they have decided you have to have all of these different kinds of people represented on your crew in order to be considered eligible for an Oscar. Has nothing to do with the quality of the movie. It now has to do with who makes up your crew. What does that have to do with the quality of a film, whether the movie's good or not? Don't know. But what's happened now is, because of this, there's all these businesses that have sprouted up. And when you look at the rules, there's all these places. You can go to this place, they'll help you. You can go to that place, they'll help you. Meaning you have to pay them in order for them to come in and help you. So they've now created a new industry of all these different groups that are going to make sure you're going to hire people, people of color, people of all different kinds of people, in order that you now have to have working on your movie, whether or not they're good at their jobs. That doesn't even show up on the list of their what
The qualifications, yeah.
their qualifications. Nowhere. But and can you imagine an industry telling you that an entire, in order for your movies to be considered for awards consideration, it's not whether they're good or not, it's they have to have all of these different kinds of people on all levels of the movie. And unless you have those people, well, then you can't be considered for an Oscar. And then they've created all new businesses to make sure that these extra, which is going to add to your budget. You know, what is the advantage other than somebody just saying, how does that help you get your movie made and made better? If anything, I would say it's a hindrance, because you're going to have people that don't know their jobs as well. In my experience, I've worked on movie sets since 1989. And my experience was that there were all different kinds of people working on movie sets. Any artistic endeavor attracts artistic-minded people. And I've worked all over the world. I've seen all different kinds of people on sets. And one thing has remained true. Only the very best people can work on movie sets, because time is money. And being on a movie set during production, a production day, you have 12 hours a day. You have this many pages you have to shoot, and you can calculate down to the second how much each second costs on a movie set. It might cost $5 a second. Imagine that. For 12 hours, imagine every second costs $5. Now, if you have somebody that doesn't know their job as well as somebody else, they might cost you an extra 60 seconds times $5.
Yep.
And multiply that out across a day. You can't afford, movie sets are not the place where you can fight for equal rights. Movie sets are a place where money is being spent, and you have to be able to hire the best people for the jobs. Period. Otherwise, you're not going to get your movie made. And these extra additional costs are cutting in to the compensation people that have done the work should be able to achieve or receive.
And essentially what this is a cottage industry of pre-production critics.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's like they come in, they criticize, well, you don't have enough of this personal group here, or this identity party here. So this movie is going to be bad, and it's not going to be worthy of an Academy Award. And I really would hope that, and it's really going to be hard to push against this, but I would really hope that most of the industry would be like, you know what, to heck with the Academy of Motion Pictures right now, because this is actually antithetical to what they're supposed to be celebrating.
Yes.
It's like, I just rather make a great movie that the audiences hopefully resonate with and love and enjoy as much as we did making it. And that is kind of more of a legacy than an Academy Award. And I mean, even Steven Spielberg has made speeches like that. Like, some of the best filmmakers in this room have never won an Oscar. And that's just the nature of the game. It's like he's kind of
Stanley Kubrick and Alfred Hitchcock never won Oscars for directing.
Yep. Never did, but they're revered. They're studied.
That's right. And I mean, it really comes down to what kind of I mean, we all want to live in a society where people are compensated for their work. And the fact is, writers are not. Writers in Hollywood have had, not only are they not compensated for what they should, what they used to be compensated for, what was par for the course of the business, has been completely eroded and chipped away at, while the business has expanded and changed. And you would think that with these expansions and with these changes to the way things are done, it would be academic that of course you would change the way writers get paid and compensated.
Do you
But
think this is a little bit of a pushback to the surge in the '90s of the spec writer selling their screenplay for $1 million as like the bare minimum?
well, I think that was, it's funny. I remember that because I was working at Warner Brothers when Shane Black sold The Last Boy Scout
Mhm.
for $1.75 million. And I remember how, and then Joe Esterhaus a couple of years later sold Basic Instinct for $3 million. And that was the bidding wars, the agencies, the studios. It became a big deal. And the problem was that didn't always necessarily translate to huge box office because you still had to execute on that script. The script might have, and I always thought it was funny. I mean, I get it. I remember reading, everybody had to get their hands on that Last Boy Scout script, and the script was great. To read it was like, it was a hilarious read because Shane Black was writing for the reader. So to read that script was an entertaining endeavor unto itself. And then I was a script reader for a while, and scripts were never as entertaining as when Shane Black wrote them, and then everybody tried to copy his style, which was annoying because they weren't as good. But I think that definitely changed the perception of the industry. When people are like selling scripts for that much money, and I think you're right. I mean, I think it sort of irrevocably changed the industry, the perception of what screenwriters could get, because everyone wanted to write the great American spec script that would sell for even more money. And I think they did. I think Shane Black might have sold The Long Kiss Goodnight for $4 million. I don't remember, but it was a weird time. And then another thing that's not taken into consideration is, how many TV shows aren't successful. So you have these writers working all this hard, working all these long hours, and their show gets canceled after 5 episodes or doesn't get a second season. And then nowadays they put all this work on, and because the show got canceled, they might not get hired the next rotation of, when they start staffing up for other shows. Oh, you were on that show, it wasn't very good, it got canceled. We're going to go with somebody else.
Yeah, we're gonna go with someone that can make a show work.
Yeah.
No, that's one of the things that I find quite frustrating, and I completely empathize with a lot of the writers on some of those shows because some of the ones are just starting out. Maybe it's their first staff job, and they have a lot of potential. And I've read a number of scripts by them of their own work, and it's actually like quite well. And I could see, oh yeah, I can totally understand how they earned a spot on that show. And then you see the show, and you're wondering, well, what the heck happened here? Now the sad truth is that it does lie on the shoulders of the showrunner because they
Of
dictate
course.
the quality of the show. And sometimes if you're a young and up and coming writer, or you're an older writer who's starting the business, because I've actually met a couple of people in their mid to late 40s that are starting in writing as their new career. And I wish them all the best. And it's like, well, you're not in the position where you can really kind of butt heads against your boss in that situation, because in an ego-driven entertainment industry, which Hollywood is, you say the wrong thing or push just a bit too hard, you get knocked out pretty quick. And that's something that you don't want to risk, because every job is a stepping stone to a better job, ideally a better job, or at least more of a stable career where you can start making more network connections and generating an income. Because again, to go back to this potential strike that could be happening, writers are all contract workers. The staff job is a contract, and it's a limited one, and they could be very lucky if they can get a television show that lasts beyond 3 seasons, because it's a bit more stable, and it allows them to go to a bank, get a loan, and get homes and plant roots and whatnot. And not a lot of writers are able to get that. And that's one of the angles that the WGA is arguing right now, is that the compensation is not enough for them to plant roots and create a stable lifestyle for them. So we're going to skip over the pension plan part because that's just increased pension plan. Like, that's normal.
Which I agree with as well.
Exactly. I agree with this. Well, I think that has to scale up. with things. But we're going to go into now the professional standards and protection in the employment of writers. Now, this is where we get onto like more of the kind of questionable aspects. Some are reasonable, but I think there's two that are concerning. The first one is for feature contracts in which compensation falls below a specified threshold, require weekly payments of compensation and a minimum of 2 steps. So
Yeah.
that seems interesting. Basically, like if you have to work more, you should be getting paid more. Just
Well, and also when they say a weekly payment of compensation and a minimum of 2 steps, obviously when you write, a WGA writer has a step. Is that a step deal? So if you get paid for an outline and then you get paid for a first draft, is that what they're talking about with a minimum of 2 steps?
that should be it, or it should be treatment outline would be your basic 2 in the
Yeah.
old days. I've never actually had to go through the steps of
Yeah, me neither. I don't
treatment or
quite.
outline. Basically, it's like I pitch the treatment, then like, oh, can you write an outline? And then you get the payment for that. And then the second step is, this is great. Here's some notes. Go to first draft, and then you get paid for your first draft. And then you negotiate subsequent rewrites and stuff, and first approach for rewrites, which means that if they have some additional notes, they come to you first to do a rewrite. You turn it in, and then from there on, they can determine to bring you back, or they hire another writer to come in and do a polish and those types of negotiations, which are always kind of disappointing to a degree, because it's like, oh, another person is writing something and you don't even get to be involved in the process, and now you got
Right.
to fight over credit depending on how much they're going to rewrite. They're going to rewrite more than 50% of the script so that they can get full credit and get a bigger pay, and you end up getting into a mini war with the writer, even though you have a great deal of respect for them because they're also a
Yep.
good writer. So yeah, it's not great that they pit against us that way sometimes. But the next step is strengthen regulations of options and exclusivity in television writer employment contracts. So I actually am in support of this.
Hmm.
I think there should be better, more refined option details for writers. I think some of the time limits should be either expanded, or certain parameters dictated where whoever does option the script is actually able to provide detailed records of them trying to get it into development, so that it's not just an option that's kind of sitting on a shelf, so that someone else that they're working with that has a similar premise is getting more investment than you. Because I've heard stories of that where 2 screenwriters pitch the similar premises but are very different scripts, but they have a preference to the one writer and they don't want the competition, so they option the other script and they just put it in this back burner
Yep.
so that they can get moving on the other one. And then lo and behold, a movie very similar in concept to what you're doing is being released, and yours is still optioned and kind of sitting collecting dust somewhere, and you don't feel like you got a good deal out of that. And I completely am in support of better regulations on those options, especially when it comes to television, because again, if you're going to option a spec script for a television series, you got to push it to get that broadcast somehow, either on streaming or network or cable. And compensation should be done. And I mean, the standard options that I've seen, like the bare minimum is like $1,000 for 6 months. And it's kind of been that way for like 20 years.
Yeah.
And I think that needs to change. The next one, and this is the one that you and I talked a little bit about, but that I think is also terrifying and also kind of ironic, considering the fact that there should be a number of science fiction writers in this guild that could see the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
And so they want to just regulate use of material produced using artificial intelligence or similar technologies. I'm on the side that, while I do understand the benefits to AI to a degree, I'm more on the side of prohibiting it,
I
because
I believe in prohibiting it entirely. There should
it
be no, if you're a writer, you're a writer.
yeah.
You should not, the idea, look, I don't think people have really understood. I'm of the opinion, we were talking about this earlier. And by the way, there are many higher ups in the entertainment business that are aware that within 5 years, people are going to be able to AI generate entire feature films. You'll be sitting at home. We talked about this earlier. Francis Coppola once, and I'm paraphrasing, talked about maybe the next Citizen Kane would be made by a 12-year-old girl in her basement. Well, that day is coming, and it's going to be AI generated material. And in 5 years, I would imagine that using prompts, you'll be able to generate an entire AI film from beginning to end. You could even put yourself in as the star. You'll be able to put fictional people, James Dean starring with Humphrey Bogart and Marilyn Monroe and Harrison Ford in a Star Wars movie. And it seems weird to think about now, but in 5 years, that's what's going to be happening, probably sooner. And as AI gets more, and the thing is, will the motion picture business as we know it even exist? When you have, Zack Snyder at SnyderCon this weekend was being interviewed and talked about when he had a professor when he was in, I guess, photography class, and the professor would say, look, it doesn't matter what tool you're using. It doesn't matter what camera you have or what lenses you have. What matters is that it's your point of view that is creating the art. And what happens when the art forms that we've loved, whether it's writing, whether it's movies, whether it's television, what happens when those entertainments no longer have a human point of view? Are they worth anything? I mean, you have whole groups of people like graduating arts center that Elizabeth teaches at, my girlfriend teaches at, just had their big graduation. People that spend their lives learning how to paint or draw and understand lighting and perspective. Well, what happens when the human element is completely removed from fine art? Is it still fine art? I mean, I look at AI generated pictures. I'm like, that's really cool. If I want to now see what Fritz Lang directing Star Wars would look like, or Fritz Lang directing Alien, I can now see all these images that people have created from the Fritz Lang Alien movie. And the funny thing about it is, here's the weirdest thing. The movie doesn't even have to exist, but I know what it would feel like to watch it. So AI has now created images that they never existed. But because AI has now put out images of it, it's now in my mind's eye. And in 100 years, are people going to even know that Fritz Lang never directed an Alien movie? I mean, it seems funny to say,
but it's a very good question.
I mean, you're going to have all these people are finding it so neat. But at the end of the day, when everything is artificial and everything is just repurposed, you've scrubbed every movie that exists and comes off the internet. And when I don't know who the first person is going to be, but what if David Fincher uses AI? He picks the prompts, he picks the camera angles, he picks whatever he wants. And David Fincher has created a movie entirely using AI, with AI generated avatars of human beings. And there's nothing real in the creation of this movie, but David Fincher did it, hanging out at home, prompting the computer, taking scenes he doesn't like and redoing them. And so you have a David Fincher AI generated movie. Would you watch it? And
I know. Yeah.
I mean, it comes down to it. Well, if it's providing entertainment, if you can watch it, what if he does a sequel to Seven? Who knows? I don't know. I'm just using that as an example. Yeah, or whatever. And what if it's entertaining? What if it's interesting? And this is what's going to happen. And so a human writer, if you're employing a writer, as a producer, if I found out that my writer that I'm paying, if I gave him everything or her everything or they everything that they're asking for on these contracts, and I find out that anybody used AI at all, well, what am I paying him for?
Yep.
Period. And I'll tell you this, already, I would imagine that 50, probably even more, of the things that we're seeing online, whatever, they're already being assisted by AI.
I have my suspicions that some of the shows we're seeing have been assisted by
for
something.
Sure. For sure.
It's basically just having a free writing assistant to bounce back off ideas at the best, and at the worst, it's them writing dialogue for you. The one thing that I think really does trouble me about AI writing is that the AI writing is using human creativity, human experiences as a base form. But if it ends up dominating, there'll be no more references for the AI to pull from to generate more stuff. They'll eventually be recycling over and over again, and it's going to be a snake eating its own tail. So you then are killing the very art form of creativity by basically just not being able to provide the very AI you're using to solve a problem with new options for solutions. It's dehumanizing. Because you talk about, like, well, what if Beethoven, composed a film score for an original movie? Well, they still need to use Beethoven as a reference. You can't just have the AI generate a completely 100% fictional thing, because this is the one aspect. This is the bridge that a physicist in England, I believe in the early 70s, postulated, which was that there's a bridge to creativity that is impossible to program. So artificial intelligence, as a result, will never be truly artificial intelligence. It'll only be a simulated intelligence. It'll be taking references from everything that exists to formulate something that looks and sounds and feels human, but can't be, because it cannot do the one thing that allows humanity to be humanity, which is imagine.
And well, and provide a point of view.
Yeah.
To have to, and the real question, and we're gonna have to deal with this with uh, our society. I mean, it's really hard when you have everyone's divided politically and everyone's worried about paying for a roof over their heads, but as human beings, we use art to contextualize our own existence. And art is, I mean, if you think about it, before we had photography, and there was a lot, I was talking to a woman last night on our member call, there was a lot of worry that when photography came about, that it would harm painting and the fine arts. But, if you go back and you look at the paintings that are hanging in European museums, the portraits and the landscapes that were done in the 16th and 17th century, those are the only representations of what human beings thought about, that in the literature of the day, of what it was like to be alive back then.
Mm-hmm.
It was the only representation we had. Like, what did it look like? Like, what did it look like to be alive in Europe in the 1400s? There are
Yeah.
giant paintings that show, and imagine human beings learning that kind of skill, because what else would you do all day long to keep from being bored, if you weren't up farming or looking for food or shelter all day, and you had the time to paint? I mean,
Yeah.
that's all we have. And if we're going to have AI start generating, how can an AI add truthfulness to a script? All it can do, like you said, is scrub the internet for other people's scripts, other people's words. And if you think about it, and at the end of the day, people will ask, well, what does it matter? And I think what it matters, it matters in ways we don't yet fully understand. I mean, and AI is going to recontextualize our culture in such a way. And that's why I've been saying a lot that I honestly believe that the currency moving forward for any individual, because I know this from YouTube, I don't think anybody would want to watch movie pundits that were AI generated movie pundits. People are going to watch YouTube because they like us and they like our opinions. And the more authentic that you are, like when people watch me, they know that what they're getting.
Yeah.
When they watch you, they know what they're getting from you. And if they didn't feel that we were authentic in some way, shape, or form, they wouldn't watch us. They wouldn't. And maybe there are Star Trek fans that vehemently dislike me, which is fine, but they vehemently dislike me because I'm honest about my opinions. And I would much rather live in a world where there are people that we love the same franchise, but they hate my guts because I've never been anything other than authentic when it comes to my love of the Star Trek franchise. And I will be critical when I need be, and I will love things when I want to love them. And whether it is, it's very funny because I've been hating on Star Trek for so long, and then I decided I liked Picard season 3, and then all the people are like, "Come on!" And you can't win. And but I will say this: they know I'm authentic. Would you watch an AI generated pundit who's giving you an AI generated opinion?
No, I mean, that was one of the risks I had, because even though I am animated, I just traced over myself in a cosplay of Dr. McCoy. Like,
Right.
that's still me.
Ye-
A little
yes.
younger, but it's still me. But yeah, that's one of the things that I worry about, because I would say I
But the
don't want to use it.
producers,
Yeah,
well, if they don't have to pay for writing, they won't.
exactly, and that's something that's going to possibly occur in the next 24 hours. Um, and it's because this demand of theirs is not strict enough. Because the way I look at the concept of artificial intelligence in regards to entertainment, I would prefer it more in the realm of, say, how Star Trek did the holodeck, where that holodeck would take the book, like, say, Dixon Hill, the fictional book of Dixon Hill, recreate it in a 3D space environment and allow you to play one of the characters in that novel and run the course of the story and have it respond to you as appropriate, because it's not generating necessarily new things for a profit to be sold independently. It's taking an existing work and allowing the reader to either read it or to live it in a very much intimate environment. It's what should be personal to them, and it shouldn't be something that kind of is mass produced to be like, oh, we're going to record this person who purchased this book who's going to play the role of Dixon Hill, and we're going to watch them, and then we're going to sell that to the rest of the world. I think that crosses an ethical line, because it's a bridge between entertainment and sport, I would say, if you wanted to use AI in a holographic environment thing, because it's allowing a person to physically be involved with the story in a different venue, but it also keeps it partitioned from actual writers developing these stories that could still be put in movies, television, books, comic books, audio plays, radio, whatever. Still have that's where it makes its money in its original form, and then you can use AI to make the at-home experience if you so wish.
I
And
don't
I
know.
think that might be a bit safer to a degree, in my sense of like trying to balance both perspectives of what that argument is, because again, the last thing I want is for an artificial intelligence to literally take my job, because I've spent many years defining and developing my craft. And it's not like I'm in a dangerous work environment where a machine could actually prevent me from dying. I'm sitting or standing at a computer or a typewriter, hitting the keys away, trying to convey a story from a perspective and share that with people and make a living doing so. And an
But
AI
see
doesn't have that.
what's really interesting. I think it works both ways. On one hand, you're going to have producers who would love to cut the writers out. All the way back to like Robert Altman's The Player. There's that great scene where Peter Gallagher's they're talking about getting rid of the writers. Yeah, just take a newspaper. Here's a story about a teacher fighting for educating kids in the inner city. You put Jimmy Smits in it, and you have a sexy stand and deliver.
Yep.
He says that's basically what AI is, and the producers and the studios now have a tool which they can eliminate writers entirely. And I think that what I would do, what I think that the WGA should be, it should be non-negotiable. If you want to be a WGA signatory, if you want to use WGA writers at all, you have to say no artificial intelligence will be ever used to write anything.
Yep.
Period.
That's
what I would do. Is if you want to be a WGA signatory, you want to use, because they're going to find out very quickly that you can use AI to do a lot of things, but to write great television, to write great drama, you think you can do it for free. But I would say, in a way, you're taking a stand for humanity. I mean, it seems silly to say that, but I would just say no way. If you want to work, we are a all natural. We talk about natural farming. Let's make it this is entirely human conceived. These are entirely human conceived stories. I would say, as much as, and I think that's going to be a thing. I think that people are going to want eventually, if you're going to buy art to hang up in your house, like if you buy a painting, I think it's going to be a thing to know that it was entirely painted by a human being.
Oh,
I think that's going to be something that's
that. Didn't they take a Rembrandt and make an artificial Rembrandt a few years ago?
I'm sure they did.
I remember an article about that, and it's like people got really upset because it's like you trained a computer to replicate a dead painter's work, but it's not from the dead painter's work. So the actual value of it is now not really there, because it's now a manufactured piece as opposed to one that was put in with effort and time and love.
And the thing that makes it valuable, there's only one of them.
Yes.
There's only one where a human being, and that the entire value of art is that a human hand created it. And I would say that to retain the soul of what it means to be a human being is to celebrate that art itself is a reflection of the human experience. And if it can just be the thing about getting and look, that's not to say that here's the problem. I would say that all the way through, I would much rather have a conceptual artist. I would much rather have the work that's being done on every facet of filmmaking to come directly from a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, you're going to get rid of a whole. How can the writers stick up for themselves versus AI when concept art is going to be allowed to be used?
I hear you. I mean, I've seen some fantastic AI generated concept art, but
Amazing.
I've also seen directors and producers take that AI art, show it to a concept artist, and said, "This is kind of what I was trying to get at, but I know you have talent. Can you make this real?" And then they basically just take some of like the shot angles, and then they completely create their brand new thing, and it does look every single time better than the AI concept
Sure,
art
it does, and that's where you run into
issues. Yeah.
issues. You could say the same thing. Well, I had this initial script that an AI kicked out for me, a 52-page script or whatever, and now I'm going to go back in and rewrite it. And see, that's where it gets nebulous. And it's like, I get it. You've now your first draft that you could have slaved over for 3 weeks, you got it in 3 minutes, and now you can rewrite it and make it better. And I get that. I understand that. And that's how writers are already using AI. Hell, I've done that already.
I've played with it like by having conversations. Basically, I've been asking them scientific questions as opposed to having them write for me because it's like I don't know how to do this. When I Google this question, I can't get the answer I'm looking for. So I ask the chat, and it's like, "Oh, this is where it is." I said, "Where did you source this?" And it would give me the link, and I just click on the link and read it because it's like it's the old semantic search engine, the chat AI chat stuff has actually done the very thing that Google was trying to do 10 years ago in regards to searching for stuff. But now it's gone so much further to the point where a person could actually say, I have this idea with this cast. What could you provide with me? What would be the most marketable approach with these elements involved? And then they would actually pump it out for you. And that's kind of dangerous because now you're not just getting rid of writers. You're also getting rid of, the concept department, the marketing departments, all the other people that would normally be creative to try and promote a piece of work for sale can all be circumvented by AI because they actually have they have access to all this data, but they don't understand the nuance of it. They'll actually be more formulaic than the current marketing departments are today as a result.
Oh, well, I'll tell you, I was explaining to a friend of mine how Chat GPT works. And I said, look, and I fed this idea. I said, write me the first paragraph of a novel about this character meeting the devil. And it did. And then my friend said, could you have it rewrite that same paragraph as if Dr. Seuss wrote it? And I did. And it did. And then I kept giving it prompts. And I ended up writing a 30-page Dr. Seuss-esque book using ChatGPT. It's done. And people would like it. And then I've been using Midjourney to create art for it. And then I'm just going to upload it to a print-on-demand place. And I'm going to have it available to buy. It took me half an hour to write it using prompts. The art's been taking me longer because it takes a little longer to do. But the question is, and I'm going to put my own name on it. Because it was, and I'm looking at this. I haven't tried this with a screenplay yet, but I'm sure you could do it. And then because I have a horror. I'm going to try and do this actually. I have a horror movie that I want to write that I've wanted to write for a long time, and I've been playing with it, playing with the horror movie. I've probably written 30 pages of it, but I'm going to use it and just first of all, I'm going to do an outline and give the bullet points and say, okay, write this, write this, write this, write this, and take my outline and turn it into text using Chat GPT. And then I'm going to say like, okay, now put this in screenplay form and then rewrite the screenplay. And then I could have a finished screenplay. So I know how valuable artificial intelligence can be as a tool. And ethically and morally, I understand that it can be used as a tool like anything else. But the question that I have that ultimately is, and this is an ethical and moral question, I suppose, and a philosophical one, is if my underlying story, I mean, I might have prompted AI to write the story, but if I'm using AI to create the twists and the turns and the perspectives that are in this story, is it real? I mean, I can go in and tweak it. And like you said, it's like having a writer's assistant, or it's like having somebody give you a vomit draft, a words on paper draft, which is what writers do all the time.
Mhm.
But if you have AI do it, which by the way, I am sure most of the screenwriters working today are already doing that.
I would not be. I mean, I've been very, very tempted, but I just had to say no because it's like it's not going to be me. It's going to be a third party that eventually, over time, people are going to pick up on and realize that this is actually from a centralized AI program. They're going to recognize it, and I'd rather struggle. I mean, for the
Well,
ethical part of it, I'd rather
I
struggle in just the original work than hit the low hanging fruit of AI to turn over a draft, which you can now. I mean, the thing you can do with AI, especially given the new American Motion Pictures Associations with regards to their check boxes, you can factor those into a Chat GPT for your story, and they will hit every single one for you, and you don't have to think about it, and your problem is therefore solved to a degree. But I highly doubt whatever comes back is going to be really of anything of true interest, regardless of those check boxes, because what creativity can an AI really have if not from borrowing from other people and not being able to look at it from different lenses? It's only going to have the one perspective, unless you try to say, please give me a Stanley Kubrick perspective on Jurassic Park, in which case, even then, it's still a speculation as opposed to what the actual man would have done.
right, exactly. But I mean, I would just say no. I mean, they're gonna have to regulate it, but to what? How do you regulate AI? How are you gonna police people using AI? I mean, already you can get away with so much.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how if you're a kid in high school and you have to write a 5-paragraph essay, how is anyone gonna learn anything anymore?
Man, it's funny that you bring that up because in high school we had an assignment where we had to do a 10,000 world report on a an upcoming technology. So people did space elevators, people did like bone replacements and immersive search engines and stuff. But you had to write 10,000 words on it, and that's a lot of stuff, and it was very difficult to do, but it was very valuable because it was part of a crucial aspect of learning how to write. Because there's the four perspectives of writing. There's the pragmatist, the realist, the analyst, and the oh gosh, I'm forgetting the fourth one now. um, the idealist. Did I say the idealist? The realist, analyst, the idealist, and pragmatist. Yes, those are the basic four. And from those four perspectives, you can explore stories and you can explore concepts and ideas and develop and figure out and solve problems. And that's what you had to kind of learn if you want to be a good writer. The thing is that with a chat, with a chat GPT or any type of AI, it's only going to have a very strict definition or interpretation of any one of those four perspectives, and you're not going to have the flavor variety of humanity and how they can balance between those and say, oh, I'm going to do something rational here, but I've got a little bit of ideology I want to address in a rational spectrum, or go a bit more logical with a pragmatic approach. And then there's also the analytical aspect of it. It's like, well, how do you analyze the repercussions of this concept that you're playing with? Like, I don't know if I mean, I'm sure one day an AI will be developed where they can simulate some of that, but I don't think it's going to have the same authenticity or the same type of revelations that a human can come to when exploring that idea, because it's going to have that extra perspective, that imagination that allowed humanity. Like, we got here because of imagination. Like, we saw something, we recognized our hand, and someone imagined, like, what if this was made of stone, and then they came up with basically the gardening claw. It's like, and or sticks or what have you, just so that they wouldn't hurt their hand just trying to dig a plow to or dig a I'm forgetting my terminology for gardening, but basically just dig a trench of sorts to plant seeds. Like, you had to imagine that an AI wouldn't ever come up with something of that nature. It would be like, you already have it, just use it. It's like, it wouldn't take into account, well, I'm injuring my hands doing this.
Right, right, exactly.
And so that's what's crazy. So, and that's what I think is also worrisome about the industry, because it makes me question when I see that regulate use of material produced using artificial intelligence or similar technologies. I'm wondering how many people in the Writers Guild are science fiction writers, if any, because this should be the biggest red flag to all of them. Maybe it's the 90 writers that said no to this that were science fiction writers, and if that's the percentage,
Well,
that's
there
quite
was, I heard
shocking.
on a radio, and again on NPR, there's a science fiction journal that publishes science fiction, and they have figured out a way to identify if a story was written with artificial intelligence like ChatGPT. They wouldn't say what that was, but they threw open, they get stories all the time, and they said they received hundreds of submissions that they used AI to write. Hundreds. Trying to get away with getting them published. I mean, it's depressing because, we as human beings should push back against what is it? Again, I think that the confluence of AI and art, on one hand, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to embrace it, which I understand. But on the other hand, we're inherently lazy. And so few of us want to take the time to learn. Will anybody in a world drenched with AI, will anyone learn how to draw or paint or play music? When, like we talked about earlier, if I wanted Dizzy Gillespie to play in a Beethoven concert, and I could hit a button, and eventually, it used to be that artificial strings, um, synthetic strings, you could always tell when somebody's using synth strings because they don't quite sound like somebody playing on a stringed instrument, a guitar, a violin, especially a cello. But now AI is going to even assist to make it sound even better. So why should anyone learn to play the electric guitar or the upright bass if you can just make music with computer generated? I mean, you already can do that, but there's still people that go to the symphony. There's still people that pick up the violin, but will that be the case in 20 years? Why would you want to? Will anybody be going to the symphony anymore to watch real players when every bit of art is going to be AI generated? I don't know. We're kind of going off on a tangent, but I mean,
It's a dangerous one. It's a fair one to go off a little bit, because what if someone says, "Hey, let's revive the Beatles artificially and have them generate new songs"? I mean,
oh, that's going to happen.
it's going to happen, and there's nothing that many people will be able to do about it. The next issue on their pattern of demands, which is also worrisome because this actually goes to in conflict with the very thing that they're arguing for, which is they want to enact measures to combat discrimination and harassment and to promote pay equity. And for those that don't know, pay equity does not mean you're paying the highest amount to everyone. It means you're paying the lowest amount to everyone.
Yeah.
And so all of their things that they want, which is increased compensation, better residuals, it's all completely deflated when they say we want pay equity, because you're never going to get increased compensation or increased residuals, because in order to obtain pay equity, you have to go to the bare minimum. You can't afford to go to the top.
Nope.
And this seems to me like the dumbest thing to try and enact in a negotiation. I don't understand why we have these two at all in there. It goes against everything that preserves the writer's ability to create an industry for themselves.
I mean, also, to me, the idea of combating discrimination and harassment is a great thing. It's something that no one should have to deal with, discrimination or harassment, but those are two very different things to me. How do you define discrimination? Like, I keep going back to what happened to Walter Mosley. Walter Mosley, one of the great Black novelists in America, created the Easy Rawlins novels that Denzel Washington played Easy Rawlins in Devil in a Blue Dress, that was based on Walter Mosley's work. Walter Mosley was hired to work on Star Trek Discovery. While he was in the writer's room, he told a story about a racist cop in Texas, and he used the N-word to tell the story. Well, this is a Black man telling a story about discrimination, racial discrimination in Texas, and somebody got upset that he used that word, called HR. HR calls Walter Effin Mosley in, one of America's great Black novelists, who's also written science fiction, by the way, and it said, "You can't use that word." And he's like, "Fuck you. I'm Walter Mosley." And the fact is, I mean, would he be protected? Because I would say whoever called HR and sold out Walter Mosley is the one with the problem. But that's not going to
Exactly.
happen.
And And I did a video on this because that writer, that individual, violated the most sacred rule of a writer's room, which is that it is a safe space, but in the traditional sense of say what you have to say to get across either the character, the story, the plot, the meaning, with no repercussions because you're trying to fill a voice to something fictional and you're trying to get it across for the dramatic purposes. It's supposed to be a say what you want and nothing will be used against you because it's not about you. It's not coming from you from an honest stake. It's like, oh, I have a villain character. We have to think of a horrible thing for this villain in order to get across that they're bad and evil. We're probably going to have to go to a dark place, but we don't actually believe in that type of stuff. But it has to be explored, and we cannot be worried about offending anyone else in the room exploring that because we want to create an emotional response from our audience with how bad this character is, or vice versa. We need to make a good person. Maybe we don't agree with their ethics or what they're doing, and they have to be this pure thing, but we got to explore that. That's the true definition of the safe space because you don't want to impede creativity by trying to censor yourself in a very room where you're not supposed to be censored at all. You're supposed to be fighting with censors to try and get across jokes or storylines or something so that you can tell the story that you feel needs to be told.
I mean, and to me, what was crazy about that whole situation is that of all the people, you know, a man who is revered for his writing, you know, who's
Yeah.
written about race relations his entire career and is relating a true story in a true fashion. And he was told that his honesty was what, offensive? And you know, this is why I'm like, what kind of a world do we want to live in?
It's one where people are imposing thought prisons, essentially, where
Yeah.
you can't do that. So yeah, that throws me away with the whole. Listen, yes, you know what? Discrimination and harassment, they're always going to be a thing. We can mitigate it, but if we put too many rules in place, we'll find too many loopholes to exploit it or to have it used against us in the exact opposite effect.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a writer's room and you get in an argument with a fellow writer,
Mhm.
you know, and like you say, it's got to be a safe space, and that writer feels you're harassing them. Who's going to decide what? See, these kinds of I understand you want to have a place that's safe. You want to have a workplace that you can you can feel safe to work in. But the problem is we no longer have people that are I don't trust people anymore to be um honest about that because there are people now that are putting their own like I can't control what an individual finds offensive. I can't control but I think when and I think we all understand like if I'm going after somebody and I'm saying mean things to them or if I'm using something against them, that can be very harassing. But if I'm going in and say if I'm bringing up a movie, like I'll give you an example, a movie Thriller, A Cruel Picture, which
Mhm.
is called They Call Her One Eye. It's the character of Daryl Hannah and Kill Bill was based on this movie. It's a rape revenge film from Sweden in the 70s.
Yeah.
Let's say I bring this movie up, and I even bring the whole rape revenge genre up, whether it's Irreversible, whether it's Last House on the Left, or whatever. I'm talking about this specific genre of movie that exists. Well, what if somebody's really offended that I've brought up this kind of subject matter in a writer's room? They call HR and they said Rob Burnett was talking about rape revenge movies, and you know I'm very sensitive to this subject because it either happened to me or it happened to somebody I know, and I really don't appreciate him talking about these things in the writers' room. And I felt harassed. And I'm bringing it up as an example of the kind of character or the kind of situation that I want to write about or that could be useful. And I'm using real world situations based on movies that previously exist, but somebody is mad I'm talking about them. Now, I can get fired for that. And there's going to be nobody that's going to speak up for me when I was talking about a movie that is real.
Yep.
And someone decides, so, you know, the measures to combat discrimination and harassment, on one hand, on paper, I'm all for that. But on the other hand, in practice, when does it get turned against you and used as something, as a weapon? Someone just doesn't like me. Oh, you harassed me, or oh, you were racist, or something. This happened to me in the real world before.
Yeah, and it's basically a very cowardly way to try and confront someone that you just don't agree with, and it's not even you're not arguing the point at hand. You're just trying to basically silence them because they said something you don't agree with. For
Yes.
for whatever reason you have. It's purely a conjectural attack, and I think that needs to be called out for when it happens. And speaking of like kind of like a conjectural thing, my weird segue is going into here, but we have the last one of their demands, which I actually quite agree with because I've dealt with arbiters. Revise and expand all arbitrator lists so that there's more variety of people that are essentially reviewing and determining who gets credit on the scripts that are submitted.
Yeah, you should explain this because this is really an interesting idea. So on certain screenplays, especially mostly in the feature world, you might have, like, for instance, Top Gun Maverick was a screenplay. They've been trying to make Top Gun for many, many years. And there were many writers that came in and worked on versions of Top Gun. And what ends up happening is whichever version gets made, whoever gets to be the credited writers, they then the script immediately goes into arbitration, and they take all the different versions of Top Gun Maverick that had been written over the years, and they have to have arbiters, like a group of them. It's like 3 or something usually, right?
Yep.
Like,
Usually
so
I've encountered it with it's 3 people. Yes.
yes, so those 3 people have to read all the different versions of the script and decide who ultimately gets credit. And do they decide if people that haven't worked on the movie for 5 years, but they came up with the original script, do they get a story credit? And who gets the actual writing credit? And this can be a very lucrative thing. So I totally agree that revising and expanding all arbitrator lists should happen.
All right, and we're just going to take a quick break because we've had over 160 people in the chat listening to us for most of this, and we've got in some donations. So I want to address some of those and some interesting questions and commentary.
Yeah.
And then we'll do a quick thing on the strike rules because those are very fascinating too. This is going to be the limitations of what writers can do if this strike goes through. So just going to pause for a second, and we're just going to go with Joe the Lawyer for $10. Thank you very much. While I never want someone to lose their job or go without pay, I have to say most writers under 40 should take advantage of the strike time off from work to go to school and learn how to write.
Advice.
That's good advice. One of the things that I will be doing is I've got some books I want to read. So I'm going to read, and I'm going to essentially justify that as research for my next story that I'm going to do. We got Stubble McShave, a friend of your channel for sure. I've seen him many times
all the way from Sweden.
From Sweden. He says, if there's a strike, will the writers be prohibited of working on the actual shoots as well? Or is it just a strike on new material for shows and movies? Well, we're going to be able to get into that with the strike rules. Basically, what it is, the general aspect of it is that if the contract and payment has been completed before the actual strike takes into effect, you're okay. If it's not completed, you are prohibited from doing any additional work until the strike has been resolved. Even going on sets during production, you can't do any actual writing work. You can be there as a producer, but if you are caught doing any writing in and of itself, it's going to come with some consequences. That's the basic understanding of what it is. It's a little bit more complicated. You'd have to, if you are a writer in that situation, you will have to email one of the WGA union reps overseeing such events for further details, because it is going to be a case-by-case basis
right.
for productions. We also have Angelico Frederick for 10. Thank you. Saying, Script Doctor, I got my flamethrower. Let's burn some down. I don't really want the industry to be burnt down. I definitely would like it to be built back up a bit and get the infrastructure returned. We have Grace Dormier saying the SAG and director agreement is going to expire in June. They'll be dealing with some similar issues as the WGA is as well. So I hope those get resolved without a serious strike. The next one here, this is my first time scrolling through all these donations here.
Sure.
We got our good friend, The Real Deal with Tom Conkle, who has chimed in and said, well said with this conversation. Thank you, sir. It's great to have you listening to us as you're plugging away.
I did a great stream with Tom. He's a great guy. We got to talk again, buddy.
Yes, you two do have to talk again. I talk with Tom pretty regularly. He's a great creative, and I enjoy his stuff. We also have our great friend Mexican Iron Man. Says, breaking news, Mexican Iron Man announces Latin X Studios for $5,000 per day. I will minority certify anything plus per firm for me and a lady friend. Oh boy. We also have Willie, the Monkey King, for $1.99 says, in most creative meds, writers are looked down on. Or medias. Some are. Like that's the one thing that I find fascinating is when I go in for pitching or when I hear stories from other writers about pitching, you get lauded by producers. They'll wine and dine you, say how great you are, how happy you are working on them. Then you turn in your draft and you get notes. And then you turn in those notes in the revised drafts and you get more notes. And then you get arguments and phone calls like, why are you doing this? I'll make you never work in this town again if you don't do what I want. And you're trying your best. It's a great about face. Tom Conkle again says, I write and direct movies, and there has never been a weirder time to try and make an original Hollywood-style old school movie. That is for sure.
It is very weird. It's weird out there.
We have Shinatsky, another California local, says Hollywood doesn't like genre entertainment. F them. It's kind of weird because they do like it, but it seems like they don't like it enough to promote it as well as they should. Because it is out there. There is a lot of stuff out there in the genres, but I don't see as much advertising for it as I used to. Which is such a shame because I think there's a lot of stuff out there that has great potential and probably would be a great respite from some of the lesser known, more advertised stuff out there. Jim Watari for $19.99 says, thanks for the great info. Well, thank you for that donation, sir. That's greatly appreciated. Tom again says, AI is removing the joy of creation to free us up for the mundane. That is definitely a potential. 100%. We've got Kessler 40. I agree that if you're hiring a writer, they should be the ones doing the writing. But even if you ban it, how do you detect it? How do you detect AI? You know what's going to happen? They're going to create an AI to detect AI.
Yeah. Well, yes. And look, the reality of it all is it's going to happen. And it has been happening. Mm-hmm. But I think ethically and morally and even philosophically, we as human beings, we're great at creating all this stuff, but we're not really great at understanding what the implications of all of it is going to be down the line. And our civilization is not, we're quick to adapt in some ways, but not in others. I mean, just look at how quickly we adapted to social media. But then, of course, immediately bad actors began using it. We're only, the smartphone, the iPhone's only been around since 2007. And already social media in less than 20 years is we're being manipulated and played with by all different kinds of actors all around the world all the time. I mean, and we're not necessarily aware of it. And I think we all have to ask ourselves, what is it that makes us human? And we need to start protecting our very essence. And I don't know how to do that. I mean, greater people than I, probably the Rand Corporation, whatever think tanks are working on this problem, no more than me. But I think we should start thinking about it. All of us should.
Yeah, I mean, because if we don't, we'll have a Butlerian jihad in 10,000 years.
Well, it's funny. It's great that you say that because that's actually what happened. And Frank Herbert prophesized this back in the mid 60s when Dune came out.
Yep.
He said eventually the reason there's no computers in the Dune universe is because they got rid of them all. You can't make machines in the like human brains. Yeah, like those of man. And that's why you have mentats and the human computers. And he, he knew this was coming. I mean, what's going to happen when you have children raised by AI nannies?
We already have the problem with children being raised by nannies as it is in some areas. So yeah,
I know.
We got Tennille, aka dislikes puns, for 10. Apologies if this has been covered already, but what about using AI to augment existing scripts, kind of like using CGI to augment practical effects? Could that be an acceptable use? It's a use. I don't know about acceptable because the CGI to augment is not really relying on a computer to generate it itself. It's the one thing that people kind of misnomer with CGI is that it's not really a computer generated image. It's an image generated on a computer by a human being. Like they're sculpting it digitally. It's not an AI making, although they do have AIs that can make it. I would say I would not be accepting of such a use for AI to augment an existing script, because then it would go back to arbitration. And
Yep.
if they said, well, an AI wrote this, then you don't have to be paid. It's like, well, they couldn't rewrite it without me writing it. It's like, nah, irrelevant. That they still rewrote 90% of it or whatever. So yeah, I would not be very amenable to that. Tom Conkle with a good point. I had to highlight this one. If we abdicate our creativity, that is the single best skill that people look for in jobs. AI is ever more distracting as it becomes more helpful, and that's true. It removes the value of the individual.
Well, that's really what it comes right down to. And then the question becomes, well, what is it human beings are going to do? You know, what are we gonna want to do? We
Yeah.
gonna do
What if?
nothing?
I mean, even if you're looking at, say, a post-scarcity environment, you still have to have that option to do what you love. And if what you love is being done by an AI, how do you get to participate in that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, Tomby, he's another person that has sent in a super chat. Says technological jumps have always come with pros and cons. AI isn't any different. The problem with AI is how much of our civilization it's going to permeate. Every single job, every single endeavor, every single part of our lives are going to be reduced. And you talk about mechanization on, say, like a building cars or something, on any kind of a line that's making something. Um, Getting rid of the human element from there was a big deal, obviously. But like you had pointed out earlier, there's safety issues, and people won't be dying on assembly lines anymore like they were, maybe. But on the other hand, when AI is permeating every part of our lives, what are people going to get paid to do? What about our economies?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to pay if AI is going to replace everything that we do? Like, for instance, you look at how many jobs are instantaneously go away because of AI, like conceptual designers, or like somebody who designed a logo, or somebody you can just do anything now. And
Yeah.
are you going to pay a conceptual designer what they used to get paid?
Yeah,
Or
when
are
you
you
have the AI option for like $30 a month, you can do it for that. I mean, that's the thing. And the same thing with like the self checkouts in normal um, shopping centers. You're getting rid of the human, and you're essentially having the customer work for you by checking themselves out, doing all the
yeah.
transactions, and then and if there's a problem, then a human has to come in and fix it. But that problem would be avoided because they would be the one doing the checkout anyway. So you've created a redundancy with an additional expense in a way to change money. Sorry, to save money. Where at the same time, on the creative side of things, you essentially can create another redundancy where you hire an AI to write a screenplay and it's not good enough. So now you have to hire a human writer to come in and rewrite that. And they're going to have a difficulty renegotiating for that cost, because the alternative being is that, well, we'll get the human to rewrite it, then we'll get the AI to rewrite that, so we don't have to pay for a refined final script, and maybe don't have to pay them again or give them residual. So it's a back and forth tug of war. Um, so it's yeah, it comes with a whole lot of things that we just have no real idea what the potential could be as of yet. We got Jane Theory for 5, saying, we've been given an example of false discrimination harassment. What would be an example of the real thing that has happened in the writer's room? Uh, from stories that I have heard, there's very few and far between, because usually a writer's room is a very welcoming type of environment normally, up until the
And it's
last
also, you got
10 years.
multiple people in there.
Yeah.
You got different, and there's people are watching. You have, and if in a writer's room, people are like, if it's almost like writers' rooms are usually self-policing
Mm-hmm.
in front of that. That's why the whole thing that happened to Walter Mosley was kind of done. The HR gets a phone call, and they're obligated to act. But rather than somebody here's the thing. I think that there's a level of maturity that we are severely lacking in terms of if you have a problem with somebody, you say it to them. You say,
Yeah.
"Look, I have a problem with what you just said." And I think now, we have a lot of people that are used to, especially younger people, that are used to going to parental figures or authority figures and asking those authority figures to step in and solve a problem. That what we've lost is the ability for people to confront one another in an effective manner. And I know that's what HR's, but you know, in terms of harassment in writers' rooms, I've heard that there have been people that are abusive.
Yep.
You know,
I've heard some
showrunners,
shoutings. Yep.
showrunners that are abusive, that say terrible things to you. You know, even throw things. I mean, that's unacceptable behavior. And then people have protected those showrunners because they want to keep their jobs. I mean, I think that happens a lot more than we even hear about. So that kind of abuse and harassment needs to end. And that I totally agree
Yeah.
with.
Yeah. Oh, same here. I mean, listen, the funniest thing I've ever seen is a writer on their laptop, and the laptop just gives up, and they don't scream or anything. They just grab the laptop, pick it up, walk casually over to the waste bin, drop it in there, sit back down, and be like, "Someone have a pen and paper."
Right.
And it's like, but the thing is that the laptop was technically studio property. And someone upstairs got really upset that they threw the laptop in the waste bin, and they tried to make a big deal out of it. But it was a very appropriate joke in the writer's room, which is that the
Right.
thing didn't work. And it's like, if you want me to, make our deadline and get pages down, I need to write. And if the equipment you've given me isn't working, I'm going to have to, throw it out and start somewhere else.
And that's true. I mean, any creative environment, any creative endeavor, when you have creative people and there's ego involved, and there's always ego. I don't mean ego involved in a bad way. But anybody who's creative and has ideas and makes things, they're precious about their ideas, and they should be.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the job. And you can get cantankerous, and it can get volatile. And I think one of the things that professionals can do is understand how to navigate that, that kind of volatility. And I
Yes.
think one of the things that I would expect, if you're hired to be part of a writer's room, part of the obligation and the understanding that we are hiring you is you are a team player, and that at the end of the day, we expect, and I wouldn't be against certain rules of conduct in a writer's room. You don't want to curtail creativity, but you also have to say, no, you can't throw a coffee cup at me.
Yeah.
I have no problem with that kind of thing. But I think that if you're going into I think there's a lot of people that don't know the difference between constructive criticism and personal attacks.
That seems to be a generational thing.
Yeah. And it's hard. I don't know how you'd regulate that.
I don't either. I mean, the only preface that I would have is, like, if you're going to throw something, preface it with food fight and scream it loud and accept to be receiving, other things back. So if you're going to throw a sandwich, someone's going to throw a banana back at you.
Yeah. And it's sometimes people just hate each other.
Yeah, there's that. Oh, God, there's a lot of that.
And that happens. That happens a lot. I mean, television writers are a singular bunch, man.
Yes, they are. And that's why they come up with some great drama here and there.
Yeah.
They know how to get the emotions. We got Alfarius Omegon, says, late, don't know if you mentioned it, but Netflix has already licensed shows and films from Japan and Korea to undercut the writer's strike. Well, it's not necessarily an undercut, because those shows are completed. They're completed works. And as Netflix is a WGA signatory, that's all they can really do to release content. They cannot commission new stuff during the period of the writer's strike.
And they have a long history of commissioning shows from all over the world. I mean, Netflix, one of the great things about Netflix, one of the great strengths is they've brought literally shows everywhere from India, Korea, Spain, France, Germany, the Netherlands. I mean, they've been buying shows from all over the planet. That's one of, I think, Netflix's great strengths. And that's another thing that, they have to take into consideration is more and more and more, it's normalized that Americans are watching shows from all around the world. That didn't used to happen. Look at how successful Squid Game was.
Yeah. And I remember reading earlier drafts of that, because it was being pitched around town and everybody was rejecting it because they just didn't get the concept. But someone overseas did put in the money, and Netflix was happy to co-finance that. We got Pyrastros for 5 says, I agree you can't preserve life through AI, but we don't accurately present it today. At least with AI, we may see a greater chance to decentralize it. Huh, that's interesting. I think the conflict in points of view with regards to our storytelling does actually properly represent our reality. We all have different perspectives. We all see the world through different lenses, and that
Yeah.
variety does paint a broader picture of reality as a whole, as well as the delusional aspects that we each share to various degrees. Some far more subtly, and others far more egregiously.
No, and I think, look, one of the great things about where we're at now is I like the idea of getting stories from more people than we've ever heard stories from before. That's why I love seeing all the different kinds of foreign programming that we're getting on streaming services. You know, I love seeing perspectives from different countries, different, like I never wanted to watch um stories that with I never wanted to see myself represented on screen because I already know who I am. Even when I was a kid, I used to not like kid shows because I was like a kid. Show me
Mhm.
shows where I can see people that I maybe want to grow up and be, you know. I want to see different worlds. I want to see different places. Like I was a huge fan growing up of anything set in grungy New York City of the 70s. You know, I have whether you're watching a horror movie like Basket Case, whether you're watching blaxploitation films from the early 70s, whether you're watching crime thrillers or like Serpico or something like Taxi Driver, you know, Martin Scorsese, because New York City was so far away from where I was in Seattle that I would watch any story about any people. I didn't care what shape, size, color, or creed they were. Just show me something in grungy New York because it seemed like an alien, you know, this dystopian alien planet that I would never get to live in. So,
Yeah, that's what I got when I saw the Warriors for the first time. You're like, oh my god, this is so cool. I mean, it's a reinterpretation of a Greek story, but it's done very well.
dude, still one of my
Yes.
favorite movies of all time. And you know, it's so funny because in that movie, if you look at it, the Warriors were the most ethnically diverse gang.
Yep.
And that was one of the cool things I always thought about the Warriors. I'm like, yeah, man, you need everybody here. You need black guys, you need Puerto Rican dudes, you need white dudes. I mean, they were the strongest gang because they were the most ethnically diverse gang.
Yep.
And you know, that was back in the late not 70s.
It was 79, 1980. Yeah, something
Yeah,
like that.
it was
Great.
79. And it's still it's just one of the greatest movies ever made.
Oh god, it really is. And then we got 52 movies a year before we get into the quick strike rules, and then we'll call the show early. Or not early, late, because it's been 2 hours, but it's been a wonderful 2 hours. He says for $4.99, can just the Disney, Marvel, and Disney Star Wars writers go on strike? Just kidding. Good luck.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, um, look, we just what we all want is we all want great stories that are also truthful and have some insight into human existence. And the problem is we can always tell when we get bad stories, they don't do those things. And you know, I don't care if I'm watching a story. Uh, I don't care who I'm watching a story about. I'll watch any story that anyone wants to put in front of me about any kind of people around the world. Uh, if the story is great, we'll watch it. But with AI generated stories, I fear that the truthful nature of the best stories that we get, um, are we going to lose that?
Yeah. The thing is that if we do lose that, I think we do lose our humanity.
Well, that's yeah,
Because the closest thing we'll have next after losing the stories that we go to watch collectively or with shared is the ones that we tell to each other about what happened during our day or what happened in the past as a period point. Like, what are you going to do? Go to a computer, type in the bullet points in AI, have it generate the story, and then you convey that to your family of how your work day went that day. Like, it's not gonna it's gonna be very cold and without any sort of life. Um, so we did have a couple of questions with regards to how will writers have to function during the period of the strike, and the strike rules have been made public for the WGA West and East members, and they've got a number of rules here. So we'll just go quickly over some of them. It says, as explained in detail in the rules themselves, prohibited conduct includes performance of writing services for or delivery of literary material to struck company and negotiations and discussions regarding present or future writing projects. So this prohibits all writers from taking meetings, to pitch, sell, negotiate any future projects or projects currently in development with a struck company. Those struck companies being, of course, the major studios and their subsidiaries and any of their partners in production as well. It might also even bleed over to certain independent production companies that are possibly part of the association or the alliance. There are also no certain notice requirements, including notice to the companies to return writer-owned spec literary material and notice to your agent or other representatives to discontinue conducting negotiations on your behalf. So now your agents and representatives can't help you. And any companies that do have your stuff, they are required to either return them if they're physical or delete records of them post the strike date. Post the strike date. And they cannot refer back to them until after the strike, is my understanding. Little bit here. We've got, so they say, finally, please note these features of the rule. So covered work. The rules prohibit the performance of writing services for a struck company in connection with audiovisual or audio works intended for initial exhibition in any market covered by the MBA, including feature motion pictures, television, and new media, as well as the option or sale of literary material for that purpose. Same applies to animation. The rules apply to all animated series covered by a WGA contract. Writers who wish to perform writing services in connection with fully animated theatrical features and television programs are advised to consult with WGA staff to determine whether such writing is prohibited before performing or contracting to perform any writing services. Members should assume that projects combining live action and animation are covered by the strike rules. Fiction podcasts. The rules apply to fiction podcasts covered by a WGA contract. Writers who wish to perform writing services for fiction podcasts are advised to consult with WGA staff to determine whether such writing is prohibited before performing or contracting to perform any writing services. And then we have hyphenates. So for those of you that don't know, a hyphenate is like a writer-director, a producer-director, or a writer-actor. So they have multiple titles. And they have extensive rules. The rules prohibit hyphenates, members who are employed in dual capacities, from performing any writing services, including A through H functions, which we will see in Rule 12 below. So there's a bunch of rules below. These are the two people that you can contact if you have questions of your WGA member, Corey Niss and Ann Burdick. I don't think I've met Corey before, but I think I have met Ann. That's their contact. This is all public, so we're not releasing anything that's private. So don't get angry at me. So the Writers Guild of America Strike 2023 rules. So immediately stop writing for all struck companies. So that I'm not going to go into all the details here because it is just basically elaborating on this. So a struck company, as I mentioned before, are any of the big major studios associated with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. The second one, do not deliver or submit any literary material to a struck company. Do not sign or deliver documents related to writing assignments or the sale or option of literary material to a struck company. So what's interesting, though, is within this rule is that they do say that you may, however, accept payment for writing services performed before the strike or for a sale or option when all steps or acts except payment occurred before the strike. So Robert, if you and I were to turn into a script today before the strike happens to a studio and they decide, yep, we're going to buy it. If they send the check to us tomorrow and the strike is in full form, we're okay to take that check and cash it, and we're not going to face any reprisal.
Well, that's good. Well, maybe we can write it before the deadline tonight.
All we got to do is get it sold. So that's pretty fair. So there are probably going to be a lot of people who are in the final steps of negotiation or where the sale has been essentially like given the thumbs up and they're just waiting for payment. So at least some writers in this situation will be able to collect some income during the course of the strike without having to do any additional writing work. Number 3, do not negotiate with struck companies for writing services and notify your representatives to cease negotiations on your behalf until the strike concludes. So they're requesting that you are required to send the following notice to your agents or any other representative as soon as the strike is called, where on date given for 2023, Following a vote by the membership of the Writers Guild of America, the WGA issued a strike order against various companies in the motion picture, television, and new media industry. You are immediately instructed to engage in no further negotiations, meetings, or discussions with any struck company concerning my performance or writing service on future or pending projects, or for the sale or option of literary material I have written alone or with a writing partner. I hereby revoke your authority to engage in any of the foregoing activities until the WGA withdraws the strike order. So that's going to be sent out most likely to a lot of people tomorrow. Number 4 is notify struck companies to return or delete writer-owned spec literary material or sample scripts. So that comes down to another pre-written example. The Writers Guild strike rules require that you promptly return to me or delete all speculative literary material or sample scripts owned by me and currently in your possession, which includes the following, and you would list your whatever items you sent in. Number 5, do not discuss future writing assignments or the sale or option of literary material with a struck company. Number 6, do not negotiate with a struck company for the development, financing, or production of a project, which is also going to be difficult for directors that have a completed script and they're wanting to get financing to go into development. That's going to put a big obstacle in front of their way. Number 7, honor all guild picket lines and do not enter the premises of any struck company. So they are encouraging the WGA members to form picket lines and to respect those picket lines and not cross into the studio lots, which is going to be very tempting for a lot of other writers that have, mortgage payments on the line.
Oh, yeah.
Number 8 is to preserve a digital date-stamped copy of all unproduced literary material written for a struck company. So that is basically making sure that anything that you have sent to them, you have backups of the date it was sent and can verify that it was digitally stamped at that time. So various email accounts can do that. You can take screenshots. You can use archive.com. You can also forward those emails to a third-party email that you have access to that gives a digital date stamp on it. That is just to protect everything and to keep stuff in order, because there are going to be, again, even though the strike is possibly going to be going on, producers can still take that script, do a table read, start budgeting things out for it, get things moving in the interim, knowing full well that, once the strike is done, if they have to do any notes, they can then issue those afterwards. But they're still going to move ahead as best they can within these limitations to get anything made so that they can reach their release date and not have to incur any additional penalties, financial or otherwise, on the production of said project. Number 9, you must inform the guild of the name of any writer you have reason to believe is engaged in scab writing or other strike-breaking activity. This is the second time I've seen this, but this is only the first time where I got a sense that the WGA is actually going to enforce this. Because as I'm sure you know, Robert, they're during the 2007 strike, there were a lot of scab writers.
A lot.
And many of them are still working today and are part of the union. And by all accounts, they technically shouldn't have been. And I would argue that some of those writers are contributors to why we have some quality issues in much of the stuff that is being released currently. I also find that this is kind of a little bit of a blacklisting situation as well, and I understand it. I absolutely do. But I also know a lot of really good writers that are desperately on the cusp of getting some really good work. That's like, you're telling me to basically lose my one shot that they've been working for years to get for this, which, it comes with the territory of the industry, sadly. That's just
no, it absolutely does. Yeah, it's a temptation. People need to make money. Desperate times call for desperate measures. But in the long run, you're harming an entire industry, I think. I think that these are issues that have to be addressed. And it would be nice if they were addressed to the point that they don't have to be readdressed every 10 years or so.
It would be nice, yeah. That comes down, I guess, to the culture within the WGA and that whole community itself as to how to reinforce and support the morals and guidelines that everyone holds to be true that benefits everyone in the industry. That's a hard thing to do when everything is really, like, Hollywood is very much a speculative industry in itself, because you're pitching ideas, you're trying to get things together, you're negotiating, you're meeting, you're talking with a lot of people, all in the hope that you'll essentially compel this thing into reality. But up until that point, until you get that check signed over, till you have that budget in your hands to actually go into production, it's all basically ether to a degree, like, because it hasn't actually happened yet. And that's a frustrating environment to work in. But it is also part of the fun and game of getting something made.
Yeah. I mean, it's, getting something made is one of the most horribly frustrating things ever. But when you get it done, there's nothing better than to actually get a movie made.
It's a great parallel to the actual struggles that happens in the fictional aspect of the film. It's like you're going against every odd you can think of just to try and get this out.
It's insane.
Number 10, you must picket and or perform other strike support duties and cooperate with guild committees charged with the enforcement of the strike rules and each guild's constitution. So that means if you are in the general area where one of the many studio offices are going to be picketed, you are encouraged, or in this case, you are compelled to participate in the picket if available, and let the people publicly know that you are striking against this particular entity for the demands that you wish. Number 11 is do not attempt to negotiate a settlement of the strike with any struck company. So that's prohibited to the actual WGA representatives. So don't overstep your bounds in that part. Here we go into a little bit more detail with the additional strike rules pertaining to writers also employed in additional capacities, so the hyphenates. So hyphenates, such as writer, director, writer, producer, writer, performer, are prohibited from performing any writing services, including A through H services for a struck company. The MBA defines A through H services as follows. So cutting for time. So you can't be a writer to rewrite a scene that cuts for time. Bridging material necessitated by cutting for time. So changes in technical or stage directions. So that's your action lines. Assignments of lines to other existing characters occasioned by casting changes. So an actor can't make it on set that day and those lines need to be said. You cannot rewrite them to fit another character. Changes necessary to obtain continuity acceptance or legal clearance. So there's another tight one. Say you want to reference some other IP and there's a legal issue with there and you have to change the IP. You can't rewrite that itself as if you are a WGA member. F, casual minor adjustments in dialogue or narration made prior to or during the period of principal photography. So even in the development stages before you roll, if the strike goes in tonight and you're on set tomorrow and you're not shooting anything, but you got to work on something, you can't do it. You are prohibited from doing so. G, such changes in the course of production as are made necessary by unforeseen contingencies, e.g. the elements, accidents, or performers. So that's weather changes. That's when you're planning to do an outdoor shoot and for some reason you have to go indoors or erect a tent and rewrite and restage the shot. You can't rewrite anything for that. I've done a number of those things. They were really fun. Difficult, but man, that's the best part. It's like, okay, we don't have this alley anymore, but we got this little street corner. Can you rewrite the scene for that? Yes. And then you got like 20 minutes to do it while they're setting up everything. It's a great pay and it's great fun, but it's also very stressful for everybody. And finally, H, instructions, directions, or suggestions, whether oral or written, made to a writer regarding story or screenplay. So you can't even walk in and be like, hey, I know it says, you say that this is it, then, or this is not it. Why don't you just change it to this isn't it? It's like, you can't do that. That's prohibited. So it's going to be crazy. Now, they also go into detail here about hyphenates are subject to the following additional rules, though they are not enforceable through guild discipline. A hyphenate member performing non-writing services during a strike should provide the guild with a list of the literary material, including the names of the writers of the material, utilized by the hyphenate in the production of a television program or theatrical motion picture. Also, the hyphenate member should provide the Guild with copies of literary materials rewritten, polished, or altered in any way during the strike, and the names of any writers working on such material. So if you're an actor and you know a writer that's rewritten the scene that you're in, and you're also a writer, you've got to inform the Guild that that writer performed during the prohibited state. B, a hyphenate member should determine and confirm that literary material on which the hyphenate performs non-writing services is not material written in violation of the strike rules. In the event a hyphenate is asked to perform non-writing services on a scab script, the hyphenate should refuse. In addition, the hyphenate member should report the request and deliver copies of such material to the Guild. For purposes of this rule, a scab script is any literary material written or rewritten by anyone for a struck company during a strike or literary material option or purchased by a struck company during a strike. And then 13, rules pertaining to non-members. So the Guild does not have the authority to discipline non-members for strike breaking or scab writing. However, the Guild can and will bar that writer from future Guild membership. This policy has been strictly enforced in the past and has resulted in convincing many would-be strike breakers to refrain from harming the Guild and its members during a strike. Therefore, it is important for members to report to the Guild the name of any non-member whom you believe has performed writing services for a struck company and as much information as possible about the non-member services. So those are the 13 rules with regards to the strike at hand here. They're fairly straightforward, not very vague. We have a little comment here from bass player 2011 saying cough, Kurtzman, cough. Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
Yes, there is that there. But that's the state that industry is currently in right now.
Well, this has been, I mean, I'm glad that we got to do this because I think that, I think it's important that people kind of get an understanding of what's going on and why it's important.
Yeah. And also a better understanding of like how this business functions in certain ways where, listen, it does appear very glamorous, and in many cases it is, but it is also still considered a middle-class kind of blue-collar job to a degree, and not everyone is making a good living doing it. One big part is the location with which they live that is kind of compelled by the industry. They really do want a lot of us to live in the LA area.
LA or, now obviously Atlanta is a huge production hub.
Mm-hmm.
And then up your direction it is to Vancouver and
Toronto and parts of
Toronto.
Montreal. And yeah, it's but the thing is that it's also very expensive to live in those cities too.
Yeah. No, it really is.
And so, so I empathize with them. Aside from those two very concerning points on their list of demands, everything else is very reasonable.
I think so too. I don't think they're asking for a lot. It's just I can't help but also look at it as someone who's produced films myself. I look at it from both sides. I've written a movie, I've produced movies, and obviously you only have a limited number of funds to make a film, and everybody's fees. I totally understand what's going on, but I do believe that the creatives have to get their fair share, and if they don't get their fair share, you're not going to get more people to go into the business to be creatives, and we need great creatives now more than ever, I think. And it's important that people feel compensated for their work. You want to have a workforce that wants to be there. And one of the things about the entertainment business is you are dealing with creative people, and they do have egos, and they do have the need to be you want to make sure people are that they're appreciated. And the last thing you need is to have your writing staff, that is the very foundation of whatever it is that you're making, whether it's a TV show or a movie. You want them to feel that they've been treated fairly and equitably in terms of what they're paid and how they're respected, and let them do their jobs. And I'm a big advocate of that. And it's traditionally in the entertainment business, everyone knows the writer is the first person kicked to the curb.
Yep.
It's been that way for 100 years.
They're the first one brought in, the first one kicked out. They brought in with the idea, the script, and then it's like, okay, you did all the stuff we couldn't do. Now we're going to make it better in our own way. And in some cases that can be true, in many cases that isn't, and there's nothing that can really be done about it. But yeah, I think I think it's fair for them to ask a lot of these parts. I think especially with the new revenue streams that are coming in, and I think it's fair for them to negotiate. I really am hoping in the near future that the rest of the streaming services do take the Peacock model of the advertisements within the streaming stuff, the network model on digital, because I think that will be better. Um, it'll allow for full disclosure of numbers and ratings to justify hit shows and the value that comes with them, and that can be used to negotiate for writers on those shows and pitching stuff like that for better pay. And then the other part too is it does filter out a lot of those that we discussed on our fraudulent creators stream, where the ones that just can't deliver and maybe have to use AI will be where they should be, forced to actually put in the effort and meet the demands required of them as opposed to just phoning it in. I think everyone benefits from that.
I do too.
And so with that being said, thank you so much, Robert, for hanging out with me for these 2.5 hours
Oh, well, this
discussing this
this is a
topic.
great, thanks for inviting me. I think this is a very worthwhile, it's great to do more of this, more of this kind of analysis of the business from that standpoint. And I think it's valuable. There's a lot of people that stayed here for the duration of this conversation, and I hope that they got something out of it.
Yes, I want to thank everyone in the chat for sticking around. I want to thank everyone who made in a donation. Thank you so much. It was greatly appreciated. And so, Robert, you're going to be streaming later tonight, is my understanding?
Yeah, I was going to do it yesterday, but I was just so exhausted from streaming and working. I'm going to do another Robservations tonight. I'm going to try and do Robservations every day, but I read this article in the Marxist. And I'm totally anti-Marxism and anti-collectivist, but I read. The funny thing is, I always get in arguments with people now about different points of view, and like sometimes I'll say something provocative on Twitter just because it's a response to an article. But I read stuff from everyone's point of view. I'm constantly looking at different places to see new. And there was a pretty good article I found about AI and creativity it's in the Marxist, which I thought was interesting. So, and then also something that we talked about earlier, what Zack Snyder had said at SnyderCon, all these things kind of merged together. And I wanted to just sort of do a Robservations about the future of AI and the future of creativity and the future of humanity, really. And as somebody who's read a lot of, I've read so much hard science fiction, and science fiction has been delving into these topics forever. And yet our civilization, it's like every time a new innovation comes up, we forget about these things that sci-fi writers have been grappling with for a long time. And it's we live in a sci-fi world now, and I don't think there's any better example of that than what AI has shown us it can do in the last year. And it's it's rapidly changing.
Well,
And
I'm looking forward to listening that this evening, because that's gonna be great. Because I love your takes, and when you find these articles in these weird magazines, or sometimes in the normal ones that you just kind of slip past.
Yeah, that's the fun thing for me is like I know a lot of people want to know, like, well, talk about Marvel and Star Wars and Star Trek more, and I'm like, but that's not what I like those things. I've liked those things my whole life, but the problem is I know more about movies and Star Trek than anything else, but I do like delving into culture and human history and the human experience is what I'm interested in. And where I'm a humanist. I believe in the power of mankind. I just wish that we would pay more attention to obvious problems. It's so funny to me. Like, I'll give you an example. Climate change. Now, we're arguing about whether climate change is happening or not. Okay, I understand. There's always been climate change. But here's the thing. Would you leave your kitchen 10% dirty? Like, would you leave dirty dishes in the corner, like 10% of your dirty dishes, and just leave them over there? Nobody would do that.
Yeah.
Cockroaches would show up. And yet, like, we're okay with a bunch of plastics that we've dumped in the ocean, microplastics, whatever. There's the 5 Pacific gyres in the Pacific Ocean where there are huge swaths of the ocean just full of our plastic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are we okay with that?
Because we
Or
can't see it. That's the
well,
tragedy.
yeah, no, exactly. And you talk about, like, whether climate change is man-made or not. In the last 200 years, in the industrial age, 200 years before this, there was not particulate matter being spewed into the atmosphere from our industry. People
Right.
go, well, what about volcanoes, Rob? Yeah, okay, there was that, but we didn't have millions of automobiles spewing carbon monoxide, and we weren't dumping arsenic in the groundwater. I mean, all of the things that, and to me, it's like, that's happening. Wouldn't it be better if it didn't happen? I mean, we live
The
in a
argument is against pollution and basically just like, hey, I mean, everyone can be on the side of clean air, clean water, clean dirt.
sure.
And that has been lost in the argument with the climate change conversation, which is funny because that's a science fiction story. Essentially, it's like, oh, you're polluting everything, and one thing that I can tell, because between the time of 2007 and 2016, I saw smog vanish from LA.
Oh, it did, and it has.
Like that's true. That's something happened.
Well, and that's the funny thing. I mean, to me, it's a pragmatic. I mean, you look at our educational system here in the United States.
Mhm.
Scores are plummeting. Kids are not reading as well as they used to. Teaching for the tests, doesn't work. Dumbing down, like, Common Core, and saying that somehow mathematics can be racist. It's like we're doing these things. Like, come on, man. I mean, we have to compete on the world stage. 2 + 2 = 4.
Yep.
It just does. And 2 + 2 = 4 for everybody. And why are we not teaching that? And everybody wants to. It's like, we got to toughen up. Got to
We
make
got
those
to toughen up.
decisions.
We also have to embrace the fact that we as a species have to stand on the shoulders of those that may have made decisions we didn't agree with. But the benefits that came from those decisions, we can then use to prevent or repeat this bad decisions that they made in the future. Like that's the hindsight effect. And the fact that people are trying to tell us to ignore that is quite ridiculous. They're saying, no, we have to persecute and remove and erase. And it's like, no, we gotta understand the time. We have to know why they did it, and we have to know why we can do better without having to repeat those same mistakes and so forth. We have to take advantage of the benefit of that mistake as opposed to trying to forget it and then risk repeating it again.
I mean, no one. Human history is. I don't think that we have the ugliest, most horrific history of I can't even imagine.
Well,
We're terrible.
we're
We're a
the only ones
terrible.
we know of with such a terrible history. I mean, it can't be perfect. There's
No,
no other frame of reference, right?
we're terrible. We just have to try and do better.
Exactly.
There's one race of people on this planet, the human race, and why don't we? It's like, why don't we just start being nice to each other? How about that?
Yeah. Be
You
nice,
know,
hold each other accountable, encourage the best,
that's right. Oh, what? We can't have a meritocracy anymore.
Mm.
Too bad. But no, but I think that these things like writer strikes and finding that kind of, it's important. This is,
Yeah.
hopefully this will work out. And the thing is, people always talk about movies and television and all that, but art is the way that we're able to convey human experience to everyone. And if you think about movies and television, especially movies, what other art form in the world can you gather people of all shapes, size, colors, creeds, belief systems, sexualities, whatever, in a room? Like, when you go to a movie, a blockbuster, say you want to go to see a Marvel film, or you're going to go see Top Gun Maverick or a Star Wars movie, whatever you're going to go see in the theater, you don't pay attention to who you're sitting next to. You put 1,500 people together in a big box theater, and they're all there to see one thing.
Yep.
Nobody cares what their politics is. Nobody cares what their racial makeup is. Nobody cares what your belief system is. Everyone's there to see Tom Cruise, man. Come on. When Dead Reckoning Part 1 opens, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 opens, everybody goes. And that's the fun of it. What other art form can get every single human being together in a room with the same desire to see what Tom Cruise is going to do Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, or take your pick of whatever movie it is. That's
Yeah.
the power of great storytelling. That's the power, that is the unifying force of our entertainment. And
And it's the shared experience, the thing that connects us, while also preserving our own individuality. Like, that's something very special. That's why books, radio, television, film, art in general is very important. It's like, here's one perspective. Everyone can see it from that perspective, get their own perspective onto it. They have that reference to use as a point of conversation, just like what we're doing now. We're talking about the writer's strike. That is a point of reference where we can share our opinions and our perspectives, and especially with the chat piping in as well with very interesting questions and perspectives of their own. It's a shared experience, but it doesn't homogenize us. It actually emboldens our ability to communicate. And I think there's value to that. And you can risk losing that when you delegate it to something that is not human.
I agree. I always think back to Spike Lee's first movie, that I believe it's his first feature, which was She's Gotta Have It.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically about a woman in Brooklyn, black and white. It was a black and white movie about a black woman in Brooklyn dating multiple dudes. And I remember I saw that. I want to say I saw it at the Seattle Film Festival for the first time. This movie was totally out of my experience. Everything about it. The main character, I can't relate to being a black woman in Brooklyn, much less dating multiple dudes. But I love this movie. And I watched this movie and I was like, wow, this is a story I would never in my own life be able to experience. And clearly it was the birth of a very talented filmmaker with a really interesting point of view. And then after She's Gotta Have It, he made School Days. And I think Spike Lee's third movie was Do the Right Thing, which I think, I recently rewatched it in 4K. One of the great American movies of the latter half of the 20th century. And, you look at that and you think, Spike Lee, no one gave him a bunch of money to go make a movie. He did it on his own. And he made this movie. Anybody now with the technology and the talent and the wherewithal and the ambition can make films. You're carrying around 4K cameras in your pocket and your cell phone. Soderbergh's made movies with his cell phone. He made Unsane and High Flying Bird with cell phones, and we don't, I would think that we would get to see Spike Lee's every day, but we don't, because it's really hard to make movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the people that want to engage in making motion pictures and television, that want to put up with the heartbreak and everything, are worth supporting. And that experience begins with somebody either putting pen to paper or fingertips to keyboards. And that's a worthwhile endeavor. And it might end with theaters packed around the world and you get something like Avatar: The Way of Water making $3 billion or whatever. But it always began with somebody sitting there by themselves, or maybe working with a partner, and writing that initial script.
I think there's no better way to end this conversation. Thank you so much for that, Robert. So keep an eye out for Robert's live stream later tonight of Robservations. In the meantime, we've got Toxic Femininity over at Midnight's Edge starting shortly. So please head on over there, and putting the link in the chat for everyone there to go visit. So thank you again, Robert, for this conversation. Thank you, everyone in the chat.
Thank you, Script.
And as I like to say, when it comes to writing, it all starts with the script.